The world was holding its breath that Christmas night, a hush broken only by the ferocity of a blizzard's howl. In the heart of it, nestled within a rundown diner that time seemed to have forgotten, Kesha wrestled with a nightmare made of cold, darkness, and a 2-year-old son, Marcus, shivering in her arms. The electricity had given up the ghost, and the ancient heater coughed its last breath hours ago. Then, a rumble, a tremor in the snow-laden air, announced their arrival. 25 Hell's Angels, a legion of leather and steel, stood silhouetted against the diner's doorway, begging for sanctuary from the storm's relentless assault. Fear coiled in Kesha's gut, a primal instinct screaming danger, but beneath it, a warmth stirred, an echo of a kindness she couldn't deny. Against her better judgment, against the warnings whispered in her mind, she opened her door. Together, amidst flickering candlelight and shared stories, they cooked, they laughed, they found solace in each other's company. Little did she know, this act of simple humanity, this flicker of warmth in the bitter cold, would ignite a chain of events that 3 days later would bring 1,500 roaring motorcycles to her doorstep, changing not only her life, but transforming an entire community forever. But before we journey back to that extraordinary moment, tell me, from which corner of the world are you listening? And please, stay with me, for tomorrow, I have a story that will touch your soul. The clock on the cracked kitchen wall, a relic of better days, stubbornly ticked towards 3:47 in the morning when Kesha finally surrendered to exhaustion and sank into a chair. Her hands, rough and worn from a life of relentless work, trembled as she counted the meager scattering of crumpled bills on the wooden table. $7.32. A paltry sum, the only barrier standing between her precious Marcus and the gnawing emptiness of hunger come morning. Kesha pressed her palms against her weary eyes, feeling the deep-seated exhaustion seep into her very bones. At 32, she bore the weight of years beyond her age, her dark skin losing its youthful radiance, replaced by the dull sheen of someone who chased survival through the haze of 3 back-breaking jobs. The small house surrounding her, once a haven, now creaked and groaned in the winter wind, a constant reminder of her solitary existence. In the corner of the kitchen, Marcus slept peacefully, curled into a makeshift bed fashioned from faded blankets and threadbare couch cushions. The heater in his room had breathed its last 2 weeks ago, a casualty of their financial struggles, and Kesha couldn't afford to mend it, so she kept him close, where the faint warmth from the stove offered a fragile shield against the encroaching cold. His tiny chest rose and fell with each innocent breath, utterly oblivious to the ocean of unpaid bills and shattered dreams threatening to engulf his mother. Their house stood isolated, a lonely sentinel at the end of Maple Street in Detroit, separated from the other homes by an empty lot, a forgotten space that no one seemed to want. It was as if the neighborhood itself had deliberately pushed her to the margins, a reflection of her life's constant struggle against the tide. The white families who resided in the more prosperous houses further down the street rarely acknowledged her existence. When they did, it was often with suspicious glances or hushed conversations that abruptly ceased as she passed. "Why did you leave us, Jerome?" she whispered into the empty room, her voice barely audible above the persistent hum of the aging refrigerator. Her ex-husband had walked out 8 months ago, claiming a desperate need to find himself. He had indeed found himself, comfortably ensconced with a 23-year-old waitress in Tennessee, conveniently forgetting the child support payments that were supposed to nourish and shelter his son. The divorce papers lay in a folder atop the refrigerator, stained with the stark red ink that might as well have been her own blood, for all the pain and betrayal they represented. Kesha's phone buzzed against the table, startling her. A text message from her manager at the cleaning company glared from the screen. "Don't bother coming in tomorrow. We're letting you go. Your kid was crying too much during your shift yesterday. Customers complained." The words struck her like a physical blow, stealing her breath and leaving her reeling. She stared at the message, rereading it in disbelief, praying that the letters would somehow rearrange themselves into something less devastating, less final. It was the 3rd job she had lost in the span of 2 months. The laundromat had fired her when Marcus fell ill, and she had no choice but to bring him to work. The diner had dismissed her when she succumbed to exhaustion and fell asleep during her shift, a consequence of juggling 3 jobs, and working 18 grueling hours straight. "How am I supposed to work if I can't find anyone to watch you, baby?" she whispered, her gaze fixed on her sleeping son. Daycare was an impossible dream, a luxury priced at $200 a week, a sum she couldn't even begin to imagine affording. Family help was non-existent, a void left by her mother's passing 3 years earlier, taking with her the last person who truly understood Kesha's struggles, her silent battles, her unwavering love for her son. Her mother's voice echoed in her memory, stern but always laced with love. "Kesha, honey, remember what I taught you about my grandmother's fried chicken recipe? That secret blend of spices has been in our family for generations. One day, when times get tough, that recipe might just save you." At the time, Kesha had smiled and nodded, never imagining that she would need salvation from a humble handful of herbs and spices. But now, sitting in her cold kitchen, clutching her last $7, her mother's words felt like a lifeline thrown to a drowning woman, a beacon of hope in the encroaching darkness. She rose and walked to the old wooden cabinet where she kept her mother's recipe box, a treasure trove of culinary secrets and cherished memories. The index cards inside were yellowed with age, the ink faded but still legible, covered in her mother's careful, elegant handwriting. The fried chicken recipe was there, nestled amongst the others, accompanied by detailed instructions for side dishes and sauces that made her mouth water even in her despair. Her mother had once run a small soul food restaurant when Kesha was a child, a vibrant hub of community and warmth before the neighborhood began to change, before the customers slowly stopped coming. "Maybe it's time to try again," she said to herself, the words tentative, fragile, immediately clouded by a wave of doubt. The next morning, fueled by desperation and a flicker of hope, Kesha used her last $7 to buy chicken and the most basic ingredients. She set up 2 folding tables in her living room, transforming the space into a makeshift dining area adjacent to her tiny kitchen. She crafted a handwritten menu on a piece of poster board and propped it against the front window. "Mama's Kitchen," it proclaimed in careful, deliberate letters, authentic soul food made with love. Marcus sat in his high chair, babbling happily as the intoxicating aroma of perfectly seasoned fried chicken permeated the house. The secret, of course, lay in the blend of spices her mother had painstakingly taught her, a combination that created a coating so crispy, so flavorful, that it compelled people to close their eyes and sigh with pure satisfaction. But as the hours slowly passed, a chilling reality began to set in. She watched through her window as people hurried by on their way to the bus stop, their faces etched with the indifference of daily routine. Some slowed down momentarily when they noticed the menu displayed in her window, but the moment their eyes met her dark face through the glass, they quickened their pace and looked away, their curiosity replaced with something less welcoming. Mrs. Henderson, from 3 houses down, actually stopped and meticulously read the entire menu. Kesha felt her heart leap with a surge of hope and rushed to open the door, a warm smile gracing her face. "Good morning, Mrs. Henderson. Would you like to try some of my fried chicken? It's made from my grandmother's recipe, a true taste of soul." Mrs. Henderson's expression underwent a subtle but unmistakable transformation the instant she saw Kesha's face. The older white woman's eyes narrowed with a mixture of suspicion and something that felt uncomfortably close to disgust. "I don't think so," she said, taking a step back from the door. "I've heard about you. A single mother, no husband around to guide you. Probably don't even know who the father is. I don't eat food prepared by people like that." The words, sharp and laced with prejudice, cut deep, but Kesha forced herself to maintain her composure, to keep the smile plastered on her face. "The food is truly delicious, ma'am. I promise it's clean and fresh, made with love and care." "I said no," Mrs. Henderson snapped, her voice laced with a harsh impatience. "And you shouldn't be running a business out of your house. This is a decent neighborhood. Keep your kind of trouble to yourself." Kesha watched her neighbor storm away, her chest constricted with a mix of humiliation and simmering anger. She closed the door and leaned against it, feeling the crushing weight of rejection settle over her like a heavy, suffocating blanket. Marcus looked up at her from his high chair, his innocent eyes wide and filled with unwavering trust. "It's okay, baby," she whispered, her voice trembling, picking him up and holding him close to her heart. "Mama's going to figure this out. I promise." But as she surveyed her empty restaurant, the aroma of the delicious food she had poured her heart into lingering in the air, a scent that no one seemed to want to embrace. Kesha couldn't help but wonder if some promises were simply too big, too heavy, for one person to carry alone. Outside, the unforgiving Detroit winter pressed against her windows, and inside, the feeling of isolation felt just as cold, just as relentless. The phone rang again, its shrill tones slicing through the silence. Another bill collector, no doubt, seeking to extract blood from a stone. She let it go to voicemail, knowing she had nothing to offer them, no words they wanted to hear, no money to appease their demands. Tomorrow, she would have to embark on the soul-crushing task of searching for another job, assuming that anyone would be willing to hire a single black mother with a history of bringing her child to work, a label that seemed to precede her wherever she went. Marcus reached up and touched her face with his small hand, his touch feather-light, as if he could sense the sadness that threatened to overwhelm her. "Mama," he said, one of the few words he had mastered, his voice a small beacon of love in the encroaching darkness. "I'm here, baby," she replied, her voice thick with unshed tears, refusing to let them fall, for she knew that if she started, she might never stop. "Mama's right here always." As the afternoon light faded through her windows, casting long shadows across the room, Kesha held her son close, his small body a source of comfort and strength, and wondered how much longer she could continue fighting against a world that seemed determined to keep her down, a world that offered little hope and even less mercy. The tantalizing smell of her mother's fried chicken recipe still lingered in the air, a bittersweet reminder of dreams that felt increasingly out of reach, a whisper of what could be, if only someone would give her a chance. 3 weeks had crawled by since Mrs. Henderson's cruel words had cast a shadow over Kesha's small restaurant venture. In all that time, she had attracted exactly 4 customers, 4 brave souls who had tasted her mother's fried chicken recipe and declared it the best they had ever eaten, their faces lighting up with genuine pleasure and delight. But for customers couldn't pay the rent, couldn't keep the lights on, couldn't fill the gnawing emptiness of her son's belly. The stack of unpaid bills on her kitchen table had grown taller each day, a silent testament to her mounting desperation. December 23rd arrived with an ominous gray sky that seemed to presage impending doom. The weather reports had been warning about it for days, the worst snowstorm to hit Detroit in the past 20 years, a blizzard of unprecedented fury. Kesha stood at her kitchen window, watching the first flakes begin to fall, swirling and dancing in the wind, as she stirred a pot of chicken and dumplings, a simple comfort food that she hoped would ward off the encroaching cold. At least she had managed to stock up on some basic supplies before the storm hit, a small act of foresight that offered a sliver of reassurance. The few customers she had served had given her just enough money to buy ingredients in bulk, clinging to the optimistic hope of a Christmas rush that had never materialized. "Mama cold," Marcus said from his high chair, rubbing his small hands together, his brow furrowed with concern. Kesha turned up the heat on the stove and wrapped her son in an extra blanket, trying to shield him from the cold that seemed to permeate every corner of the house. The house felt colder than usual, even with the stove blazing, but she attributed it to the impending storm, the icy grip of winter tightening around them. Outside, the wind had picked up, its intensity growing with each passing moment, rattling the windows with increasing ferocity, as if trying to tear them from their frames. By evening, the snow was falling in thick, impenetrable sheets, obscuring everything beyond her front yard, transforming the world into a swirling white void. The weather had deteriorated to such an extreme that even the few cars that normally braved the desolate road past her isolated house had vanished completely, seeking refuge from the storm's relentless onslaught. The silence was eerie, broken only by the howling wind, a mournful cry that seemed to carry the weight of the world, and the occasional creak of tree branches bending under the ever-increasing weight of the accumulating snow. Kesha fed Marcus his dinner and carefully got him ready for bed, trying to ignore the growing cold that seemed to seep through the walls, chilling her to the very core. She had turned the thermostat up twice, but the house remained stubbornly cold, the temperature plummeting with each passing hour. A nagging worry began to form in the back of her mind, a sense of foreboding that she couldn't shake. On Christmas Eve morning, she woke to a house that felt like a freezer, the air biting and unforgiving. Her breath formed visible clouds in the air, a stark reminder of the frigid temperature, and Marcus was shivering uncontrollably despite being bundled in every blanket she possessed. She rushed to the thermostat, her heart pounding with dread, and found it displaying an error message she had never encountered before, a string of blinking lights that spelled out disaster. "No, no, no," she whispered, her voice laced with panic, pressing buttons frantically, hoping to somehow reset the system, to restore the precious heat that was their only defense against the deadly cold. "Not now, please. Not now." She tried calling the heating repair service, her hands trembling as she dialed the number, but the automated message informed her that due to the severe weather conditions, all non-emergency calls would be handled after the storm passed, a vague promise that offered little comfort. Emergency calls had a 72-hour wait time, a delay that could prove fatal in these extreme conditions. 72 hours, she said aloud, staring at her phone in disbelief, the words echoing in the cold, empty room. Marcus began to cry, a thin, wailing sound that tore at her heart, a primal scream of fear and discomfort. She picked him up and held him close, feeling how cold his little body had become despite the layers of clothing, his small frame shaking with uncontrollable tremors. The power went out that afternoon with a sudden click, a final surrender that plunged the house into darkness, leaving them stranded in the frigid embrace of the storm. Kesha fumbled for candles and matches, her hands shaking from both cold and fear, her movements clumsy and uncertain. The few flickering flames provided minimal light and even less warmth, casting long, dancing shadows that seemed to mock her despair. Outside, the storm raged with a fury that felt almost supernatural, as if nature itself was determined to test her resolve, to push her to the very brink of endurance. She moved Marcus into the kitchen, the smallest room in the house, hoping to conserve what little heat the candles could provide, creating a fragile pocket of warmth against the encroaching cold. Fortunately, her gas stove still worked, a small blessing amidst the overwhelming despair, so she kept pots of water boiling continuously, creating steam that offered some momentary relief from the bitter chill. She opened the oven door and let the heat from the pilot light escape, hoping to warm the small space, transforming the kitchen into a makeshift shelter against the storm's relentless assault. "It's going to be okay, baby," she whispered to Marcus, her voice laced with a forced optimism, though she wasn't sure she believed it herself. "Mama's got food, and we're going to stay warm right here in the kitchen, huddled together against the storm." The stockpile of ingredients she had bought for her failed restaurant became their salvation, a hidden treasure that offered a glimmer of hope. Canned goods, dried beans, rice flour, and various seasonings lined the shelves, a testament to her foresight and determination. She had enough food to last several days, maybe even a week if she was careful, rationing their portions and making every morsel count. It was the one blessing in an otherwise desperate situation, a lifeline that kept them afloat in the sea of despair. By the second day, the cold had become almost unbearable, a constant, gnawing presence that permeated every cell of their bodies. Kesha wrapped herself and Marcus in every piece of fabric she could find, creating a cocoon of blankets and coats around them as they huddled near the stove, seeking refuge in its meager warmth. The candles had burned down to stubs, their flames flickering weakly, and she was rationing the remaining ones carefully, knowing that their light was their only connection to the outside world. Marcus had developed a slight cough, a dry, hacking sound that worried her constantly, sending shivers of fear down her spine. She held him against her chest, feeling his small body shake with each cough, and wondered how long they could survive in these conditions, how long their fragile shelter could withstand the storm's relentless fury. The snow outside had piled so high against the windows that it blocked most of the natural light, turning the house into a tomb, a dark and silent prison. On the third night, as she sat in the dark, listening to the wind howl like an angry beast, its mournful cry echoing through the house, Kesha heard something that made her freeze, her blood turning to ice. It was faint at first, almost indistinguishable from the storm itself, a distant rumble that she almost dismissed as a trick of the wind. But as she listened more carefully, straining her ears against the storm's fury, the sound became unmistakable, growing clearer and more distinct with each passing moment. Motorcycle engines, the deep, rumbling growl of multiple Harley-Davidson motorcycles, cutting through the storm like mechanical thunder, defying the impossible conditions. The sound grew louder and closer, the engines roaring in unison, until it seemed to surround her house completely, a cacophony of noise that shattered the eerie silence. Through the small gap in the snow-covered window, she could see the flickering glow of headlights approaching, cutting through the swirling white like beacons in the darkness. Who would be riding motorcycles in this weather? She whispered to herself, clutching Marcus tighter, her heart pounding in her chest. What could possibly bring anyone out into this storm, braving the treacherous conditions? The engines grew louder and louder, the vibrations shaking the very foundation of her house, until suddenly, they stopped, the silence that followed somehow more frightening than the noise had been, amplifying her fear and uncertainty. Kesha's heart pounded in her chest, a frantic drumbeat against her ribs, as she strained to hear what was happening outside, her senses on high alert. Heavy footsteps crunched through the snow, multiple sets of boots making their way toward her front door, their movements deliberate and purposeful. She could hear muffled voices, deep and rough, speaking in low tones, their words indistinct, unintelligible, adding to the sense of mystery and foreboding. She couldn't quite make out what they were saying, but the tone was urgent, serious, as if they were discussing a matter of life and death. Marcus stirred in her arms, awakening from his fitful sleep, his eyes wide with confusion and fear, sensing his mother's anxiety through the way her body had become rigid and tense. Then came the knock, a sound that echoed through the cold house like a gunshot, shattering the fragile peace. 3 deliberate raps on her front door, their impact reverberating through her bones, sending shivers down her spine. Kesha's breath caught in her throat, her lungs seizing with fear. In all her years of living in the isolated house at the end of Maple Street, no one had ever come to her door during a storm, especially not anyone riding motorcycles through a blizzard, a scenario that seemed ripped from the pages of a nightmare. The knock came again, more insistent this time, followed by a voice that carried through the wind, its tone rough but laced with a hint of desperation. "Ma'am, we need help. We're freezing out here, stranded in this storm." Kesha's mind raced with possibilities, none of them good, each scenario more terrifying than the last. Who were these people? What did they want? And why had they chosen her house of all places to stop at during the worst storm in 20 years? A question that echoed in her mind, amplifying her fear and uncertainty. Marcus began to cry softly, his small whimpers a reflection of his mother's unspoken fear, as if he could sense the danger that lurked outside their fragile sanctuary. Kesha rocked him gently, trying to calm both him and herself. As she stared at the front door, her gaze fixed on the barrier that separated them from the unknown, and wondered if opening it would save them or destroy them, if it would lead to salvation or utter ruin. The wind howled louder, its mournful cry intensifying, and the knock came a third time, its impact sending shivers down her spine. The third knock echoed through the house like a gunshot, its sound amplified by the silence and isolation, and Kesha felt her heart slam against her ribs, a frantic drumbeat of fear. Marcus whimpered in her arms, his small body trembling, sensing his mother's terror through the way her body had gone rigid, her muscles tense. She pressed her back against the kitchen wall, moving as far from the front door as she could get while still being able to hear what was happening outside, her senses on high alert. "Please, ma'am," the voice called again, rougher now, but with an unmistakable edge of desperation, a plea that cut through the storm's fury. "We're not here to hurt anyone. We just need to get out of this storm, to find some shelter from the cold." Through the gap in the snow-covered window, Kesha could make out dark shapes moving in the swirling white, their forms indistinct and menacing. The headlights of the motorcycles cut through the blizzard like angry eyes, casting long, distorted shadows that danced across her yard, adding to the surreal and terrifying scene. She counted at least 6 or 7 bikes, maybe more, their presence a stark reminder of the danger that lurked outside. Her mind immediately went to every news story she had ever heard about motorcycle gangs, every warning her mother had given her about dangerous men who rode in packs, men who lived outside the law and preyed on the vulnerable. "Think, Kesha, think," she whispered to herself, bouncing Marcus gently as he began to fuss, trying to calm him while simultaneously trying to formulate a plan to assess the threat and find a way to protect her son. She crept closer to the front window, staying low and keeping Marcus close to her chest, using him as a shield against the unknown. What she saw made her blood turn to ice, confirming her worst fears. 25 men in heavy leather jackets stood in her front yard, their figures looming in the darkness, their faces hidden behind helmets and scarves, making them appear even more menacing. Snow clung to their shoulders and arms, their bodies covered in a thick layer of white, and even from inside the house, she could see how they shivered and stamped their feet against the cold, their movements betraying their discomfort and desperation. The man at the front of the group was enormous, his size intimidating even through the snow-blurred window. Even bundled in winter gear, his imposing physique was undeniable, a force of nature. He had removed his helmet, revealing a weathered face, etched with the lines of a hard life, framed by a thick beard that was already accumulating snow, turning it white and crystalline. His eyes, visible even through the storm, were sharp and alert, assessing her house, searching for any sign of weakness. When he looked directly at her window, his gaze piercing and intense, Kesha ducked down quickly, her heart hammering in her chest, her breath catching in her throat. "We know you're in there," he called out, his voice carrying easily over the wind, a sound that seemed to vibrate through the house. "We can see the candlelight flickering through the windows. Look, I know this is scary, but we're not going anywhere in this weather. We can either freeze to death out here, or you can let us wait it out inside, seeking refuge from the storm. We'll leave the moment the storm passes, I promise you that." Kesha's hands trembled uncontrollably as she held Marcus tighter, seeking comfort in his small presence. Every instinct screamed at her to stay hidden, to wait them out, to hope they would eventually leave, their patience wearing thin. She had seen enough movies and heard enough stories to know what happened when women opened their doors to strange men in the middle of the night, especially women like her alone, vulnerable, with no one to call for help. But as she watched through the window, peering through the swirling snow, she saw one of the men stumble and nearly fall, his legs giving way beneath him. Another reached out to steady him, his hand gripping the injured man's arm, and she could see dark stains on his pants that looked suspiciously like blood, a chilling confirmation of their distress. These weren't men looking for trouble, she realized with a jolt of clarity. These were men in genuine distress, injured and desperate for shelter. Marcus coughed again, the sound harsh and rattling, reminding her how cold the house had become, how precarious their situation was. If these men were suffering in the storm outside, they probably weren't much worse off than she and her son were inside, shivering in the cold darkness. At least they had each other, a bond of brotherhood that offered strength and support. She had been alone with her fear for 3 long days now, and the isolation was starting to feel more dangerous than whatever waited outside her door, threatening to consume her. The memory of her mother's voice suddenly filled her mind, as clear as if she were standing right beside her, her words resonating with unwavering conviction. It was something her mother had said countless times during Kesha's childhood, a guiding principle that had shaped her life. Usually, when they encountered homeless people or strangers asking for help, her mother would say, her voice filled with compassion, "Baby girl, when someone's in trouble, you help them, you offer a hand, no matter who they are or where they come from. Doesn't matter what they look like or what they believe, you help them because one day, you might be the one who needs helping, the one who's lost and alone. The good Lord sees everything, honey, and what you give out comes back to you tenfold, a blessing that will enrich your life beyond measure." Her mother had lived by those words, even when it meant giving away their last $10 to someone who claimed they needed bus fare, trusting their honesty even when doubt lingered in her own mind. Even when it meant inviting strange neighbors over for dinner, people she barely knew, simply because they looked hungry, their faces etched with the hardships of life. Even when her father had complained that she was too trusting, too willing to see the good in people who might not deserve it, her mother had remained steadfast in her belief. "Help the traveler in need," her mother had always said, her voice unwavering, "even if he looks like your enemy, for compassion knows no boundaries." Kesha looked down at Marcus, his small face upturned, his dark eyes staring up at her with complete trust, unwavering faith. He was depending on her to make the right choice, to keep him safe and warm, to protect him from the dangers that lurked outside their door. But keeping him safe might mean taking a risk that terrified her to her core, defying her instincts and embracing the unknown. Another knock came, gentler this time, a plea rather than a demand, its tone laced with desperation. "Ma'am, we've got a man out here who's hurt pretty bad," his voice trembling with cold and exhaustion. "He's been bleeding for hours, and the cold isn't helping, exacerbating his injuries. I'm begging you, just until the storm passes, just until we can find some way to get him to a hospital. We'll sleep on the floor. We won't cause any trouble, I promise. We won't touch anything, won't disturb your peace. We just need to get warm, to save our friend's life." Kesha closed her eyes and tried to think clearly, pushing past the fear and uncertainty that threatened to overwhelm her. She could hear the pain in the man's voice now, the genuine desperation, the raw vulnerability that cut through the storm's fury. These weren't the voices of predators, of men seeking to exploit her vulnerability. These were the voices of people who were as scared and cold as she was, clinging to hope in the face of overwhelming adversity. She stood up slowly, careful not to startle Marcus, who was watching her every move with worried eyes, his gaze filled with unspoken questions. She walked toward the front door, her legs feeling like jelly, unsteady and weak, every step seeming to take forever, her heart pounding in her chest with each agonizing inch. When she reached the door, she pressed her forehead against the cold wood, seeking solace in its unyielding strength, and tried to summon a courage she wasn't sure she possessed, a bravery that seemed to elude her grasp. "Are you really hurt?" she called through the door, her voice barely a whisper, laced with a mixture of fear and hope. "Yes, ma'am," the voice replied, its tone urgent and sincere. "Danny here took a bad spill about 10 miles back, skidding on the ice. We've been trying to find shelter ever since, searching for any sign of help in this storm. How many of you are there?" she asked, her voice trembling, bracing herself for the answer. 25, the voice replied, its tone apologetic. "Ma'am, I know that sounds like a lot, that the number might frighten you, but we stick together, we look after each other. We don't leave anyone behind, that's our code." 25. The number hit her like a physical blow, stealing her breath and leaving her reeling. 25 strange men in her tiny house, sharing her limited space with her and her baby. The thought both terrifying and overwhelming. It was either the most foolish thing she could possibly do, a reckless act that could jeopardize everything she held dear, or it was exactly what her mother would have done in the same situation, a testament to her unwavering compassion and unwavering belief in the inherent goodness of humanity. Marcus reached up and touched her face with his small hand, his fingers cold but gentle, his touch a source of comfort and strength. He babbled something unintelligible, his words garbled but his tone encouraging, as if he were trying to tell her that everything would be okay, that she was strong enough to face whatever lay beyond the door. "Mama's scared, baby," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion, tears pricking at her eyes. "But maybe being scared isn't always wrong," she continued, her voice gaining strength with each word. "Maybe sometimes you have to be scared and brave at the same time, to face your fears and do what's right, even when it terrifies you." She took a deep breath, trying to steady her nerves, unlocked the deadbolt, the sound echoing through the silence, and slowly opened the door, her movements hesitant and uncertain. The man standing directly in front of her was even larger than she had imagined, his presence filling the doorway, blocking out the storm's fury. His leather jacket was covered in patches and pins she didn't recognize, symbols of a world she knew nothing about, and his beard was streaked with gray, a testament to the years of hard living he had endured. But when their eyes met, his gaze meeting hers, she saw something she hadn't expected, a glimmer of humanity that pierced through the intimidating exterior. Kindness, exhaustion, gratitude, and beneath it all, a gentleness that seemed completely at odds with his rough appearance, a quiet strength that resonated with her own. "Thank you," he said simply, his voice rough with emotion, his words laced with sincerity. "I'm Mike. We won't forget this, I promise you." Behind him, the other 24 men stood in the swirling snow, their figures blurred by the storm, waiting for permission to enter, their faces etched with a mixture of anticipation and apprehension. They looked like a scene from a movie about outlaws and rebels, a band of hardened men who lived outside the boundaries of society. But as Kesha looked closer, peering through the swirling snow and the darkness, she saw what Mike saw, the hidden vulnerability beneath the tough exterior. Men who were cold, tired, and genuinely grateful for her kindness, her willingness to open her door to strangers in need. "Come in," she said, her voice barely above a whisper, her words trembling with a mixture of fear and determination. "Come in before you all freeze to death." As the first man stepped across her threshold, shaking snow from his jacket and stomping his boots on her doormat, Kesha realized she had just made a decision that would change everything, altering the course of her life forever. For better or worse, she was no longer alone, no longer facing the storm by herself. One by one, the 25 men filed through Kesha's front door, their presence filling her small house, their movements cautious and respectful. Each one carefully wiping their boots on the small mat before stepping inside, a simple act of courtesy that spoke volumes about their character. What struck her immediately was how quietly they moved, their voices hushed, as if they were afraid of disturbing her or her son, their actions belying their rough appearance. A whisper of wind, a promise of snow, but something else lingered in the air that night, a question hanging heavy, unspoken. How could so many shadows gather without swallowing the light? They entered not as invaders, not with the boisterous clamor of a storm, but with a measured stillness, each movement a careful ballet designed to not startle her, not to awaken the innocent slumber of young Marcus. These were not the cinematic devils of the open road, not the reckless souls society paints with such broad strokes. Theirs was a different kind of wild, a controlled power humming beneath layers of leather and steel, a discipline etched into the lines of their faces, the set of their shoulders. Mike, the last to cross the threshold, secured the door with a heavy click, the sound echoing in the small space. Seeing Kesha's surprise, a flicker of something akin to fear in her eyes, he raised his hands in a gesture of peace, a silent offering of reassurance. "Just keeping the cold out, ma'am, and keeping you safe while we're here." But the words did little to ease the sudden claustrophobia. 25 giants, swathed in leather, filled her modest home, every corner of the living room and kitchen now occupied by their imposing presence. Yet, instead of the chaos she had braced herself for, a hush fell, a reverent silence as they surveyed her humble abode. Helmets and gloves were removed, revealing faces weathered by sun and wind, faces scarred by life but devoid of malice. "Thank you," a young man near the door breathed, his voice a mere whisper, barely audible above the crackling fire. "You have no idea what this means." From behind a mountain of blankets, Marcus peeked out, his eyes wide with curiosity, not fear. A biker, his temples touched with silver, his eyes holding a gentle light, noticed the small observer and offered a soft wave. Marcus, initially startled, retreated behind the blankets, only to slowly emerge again, captivated. "Is that your little boy?" the man asked, his voice gentle as a summer breeze. "Yes, that's Marcus. He's 2. Beautiful child. I'm Tommy. I've got grandkids about his age." A thread of tension unraveled within Kesha. Tommy, with his worn and patched leather jacket, looked more like a kindly grandfather than a hardened criminal. His beard was neatly trimmed, and when he smiled at Marcus, genuine warmth crinkled the corners of his eyes. Mike stepped forward, a slight limp betraying an old wound. "Ma'am, I need to be straight with you. We've got a man here who's hurt pretty bad. Danny took a spill on the ice about 10 miles back, and he's been bleeding ever since. Do you have any first aid supplies?" Kesha's gaze followed Mike's, landing on a young man slumped heavily on her couch. His face was ashen, and dark stains blossomed across the left leg of his jeans. Even from across the room, she could see his hands trembling. "I have some things," she said, already moving towards the bathroom. "Let me get my supplies." She returned with a plastic container overflowing with bandages, antiseptic, and medical tape. Kneeling beside Danny, she saw that he was younger than the rest, barely out of his teens. His eyes were glazed with pain, and he flinched when she gently touched his leg to examine the wound, but he did not pull away. "This is pretty deep," she said, looking up at Mike. "He really should see a doctor. Can't get to one in this storm, Mike replied, his voice tight. Roads are completely blocked. We've been trying to get him help for hours. Kesha looked down at the young man's pale face, a wellspring of compassion rising within her. I can clean it and bandage it, but you need to keep pressure on it to stop the bleeding. As she carefully cleaned the wound and applied antiseptic, the other men watched in complete silence, their gazes intense. She could feel their eyes on her, but there was no menace, no threat, only a palpable concern. Instead, she sensed something she hadn't anticipated, a silent respect. You're good at this, Danny murmured weakly as she wrapped his leg with clean bandages. My mother was a nurse before she opened her restaurant. Kesha replied, her touch gentle but firm. She taught me a few things. While she tended to Danny's injury, the other men began to organize themselves, as if a silent command had been issued. Some moved to the kitchen, examining her meager food supplies, their expressions thoughtful. Others checked the windows and doors, not in a threatening manner, but with the practiced efficiency of soldiers securing a perimeter. Ma'am, said a man with a deep southern drawl, his voice surprisingly soft. Would it be all right if we made some food? We've got some rations in our packs, and it looks like you've got ingredients here. We could make enough for everyone. Please, call me Kesha, she said, finishing with Danny's bandage. And yes, I've got plenty of food. I was trying to run a restaurant out of here. Mike's eyebrows rose in interest. A restaurant? What kind of food? Soul food. My mother's recipes. Fried chicken mostly. Your mother's fried chicken, repeated Tommy, a grin spreading across his face. Well, now we're talking. Haven't had real home cooking in months. As the evening unfolded, a transformation began to bloom in the small house. The kitchen became a symphony of sounds, a blend of clanging pots, quiet laughter, and the sizzle of frying chicken. Several of the men revealed hidden talents, proving to be surprisingly adept cooks, working together to create a meal that fused Kesha's ingredients with their own trail rations. The aroma of seasoned chicken and simmering vegetables filled the cold house, breathing life into it, creating a warmth that transcended mere temperature. Marcus, drawn by the gentle voices and the promise of delicious smells, gradually emerged from his hiding place. Tommy, settling cross-legged on the floor, showed Marcus how to construct towers with empty food cans. Other men, their rough hands surprisingly tender, joined in, playing simple games with the toddler. He's a smart one, observed a man named Jake, watching Marcus stack the cans with intense concentration. Reminds me of my nephew back in Tennessee. As they gathered to eat, crowding around Kesha's small table and spilling onto the floor, Mike cleared his throat, his gaze sweeping over the assembled faces. Kesha, I think we owe you an explanation about who we are and why we were out in this storm. She looked around, meeting the serious expressions of the men, young and old. We're mostly veterans, Mike began, his voice low. Army, Marines, Navy. We served together in different units over the years. And when we came home, we found it hard to fit back into regular life. The brotherhood we had over there, the sense of purpose. It was hard to find that in the civilian world. So we found each other, added Tommy, his eyes reflecting the candlelight. Started riding together, taking care of each other the way we did in service. We're not a gang, said Jake firmly, his voice ringing with conviction. We don't deal drugs or hurt people. We're just men who needed a family, and we made one for ourselves. Danny, looking significantly better after the food and medical attention, spoke from his spot on the couch. We were riding to a Christmas gathering in Chicago. All the chapters from the Midwest come together every year to do charity work. Toys for kids, food for families who need it. The storm caught us by surprise, Mike continued, his voice tinged with regret. Weather reports said it wouldn't hit until tomorrow. We were trying to make it to a motel when Danny's bike hit that patch of ice. Kesha listened to their stories with growing astonishment, her initial fear dissolving into understanding. These were not the monsters she had imagined. They were men who had served their country, who had wrestled with the transition back to civilian life, and who had forged their own community, a haven of support in a world that often misunderstood them. I know what people think when they see us, Mike said quietly, his gaze steady. The leather, the bikes, the tattoos. They see outlaws and troublemakers, but we're not. We're just trying to take care of our own and maybe help some other people along the way. As Mike spoke, Kesha felt a familiar ache in her chest, the sting of judgment, of being defined by appearances, of having people make assumptions based on the color of her skin and her circumstances. She remembered Mrs. Henderson's dismissive words about employers who wouldn't hire her, the neighbors who crossed the street when they saw her approaching. "I understand," she said softly, her voice filled with empathy. "People look at me and see a single black mother in a poor neighborhood, and they think they know everything about me. They think I'm lazy or irresponsible, or that I must have done something wrong to end up where I am." The room fell silent, save for the crackling candles and the distant howl of the wind outside. Mike's gaze drifted, his eyes focused on some distant memory, some unseen landscape beyond the walls of her small house. "I had a daughter once," he said quietly, his voice barely a whisper, the words heavy with unspoken grief. "Emily, she was 6 years old, beautiful little girl with blonde pigtails and the biggest smile you ever saw." His hands clenched and unclenched in his lap, a silent battle against the pain. "Leukemia took her 3 years ago, fought for 18 months, but the cancer won." Several of the men shifted uncomfortably, a shared understanding of boundaries, of unspoken pain. This was clearly a sacred wound, a place Mike rarely allowed himself to revisit. "Her mother blamed me," he continued, his voice cracking slightly. "Said if I'd been a better provider, if I'd had better insurance, maybe we could have gotten her into better treatment programs. Maybe she'd still be alive." His voice was laced with guilt and helplessness. "After Emily died, my wife left. Said she couldn't look at me without seeing what we'd lost." Kesha felt tears welling in her eyes, a silent communion of shared sorrow. "Mike, I'm so sorry." "Point is," Mike said, his gaze locking with hers, the intensity of his emotions palpable. "People think they know why I ride with these guys. Think it's because I'm running from responsibility or looking for trouble. Truth is, I'm running from an empty house and a marriage that died with my little girl. These men, they're the only family I have left." The vulnerability in his voice seemed to shatter something in the room, a wall of unspoken emotions collapsing. Kesha found herself speaking, compelled to share her own burden. "My husband left 8 months ago," she said, her voice steady despite the pain that laced the words. "Jerome said he couldn't handle the pressure of being a father, couldn't handle being poor, said he needed to find himself." She let out a bitter laugh. "Turns out he found himself with a 23-year-old waitress in Tennessee." "Did he ever see Marcus, help support him?" asked Tommy gently, his eyes filled with compassion. "Not once. Not a phone call. Not a dollar. Nothing. It's like we never existed." Kesha wiped her eyes with the back of her hand, her voice raw with emotion. "People see me struggling, and they assume I picked a bad man, or that I was careless, or that I'm just another statistic. They don't see that I loved someone who promised to love me back, and that I'm doing everything I can to give my son a good life. Sometimes life just breaks people," Mike said simply, his words resonant with truth. "And sometimes it breaks the people who love them too." The shared pain settled over the room like a warm blanket, a silent acknowledgement of their shared humanity. These were people who knew loss, who understood the sting of judgment, who had learned to survive in a world that often felt cruel. "But you opened your door anyway," Mike said, his voice filled with gratitude. "Even though you were scared, even though you had every reason not to trust us." "My mother always told me to help people who were in trouble," Kesha replied, her eyes shining with unshed tears. "She said that when you turn away from someone who needs help, you're really turning away from yourself." Marcus had fallen asleep in Tommy's lap, his small body relaxed and peaceful. The sight of her son sleeping safely in the arms of a man she had feared just hours earlier made Kesha's eyes fill with tears. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "All of you. I haven't felt this safe in my own home for a long time." Mike nodded solemnly, his gaze holding hers. "Neither have we, Kesha. Neither have we." Outside, the storm continued to rage, a symphony of wind and snow. But inside the small house at the end of Maple Street, 25 strangers and a single mother had found something precious and rare, a sanctuary where they could simply be human, caring for one another, offering comfort in the face of adversity. As the evening deepened, the small house settled into an unusual but comforting rhythm. The 25 bikers had found their places throughout the living room and kitchen, some sitting on the floor with their backs against the walls, others sprawled on cushions they had salvaged from the couch. The candlelight danced across weathered faces, faces that had softened into expressions of genuine contentment. For the first time in months, Kesha's house felt truly warm, not just from the body heat of so many people, but from a deeper, more profound source. The loneliness that had weighed her down for so long seemed to lift, a physical burden being removed from her shoulders. She moved through her own home with a lightness she had almost forgotten existed. Marcus had claimed Tommy as his new best friend, insisting on showing him every toy he owned, chattering away in the half-formed words and gestures that only 2-year-olds could master. Tommy listened with the patience of a man who genuinely loved children, responding to Marcus's babbling as if it were the most important conversation he had ever had. "He's got good instincts about people," Mike observed, watching Marcus attempt to braid Tommy's beard. "Kids always know. He's been so lonely," Kesha said quietly, her voice filled with tenderness. "It's just been the two of us for so long. He's not used to having this many people around, but he seems to love it." "We all do," said Jake from his spot near the window, his voice wistful. "Been a long time since any of us sat around a family table like this." Danny had been dozing on the couch, his color much improved after the meal and medical attention. But around midnight, Mike noticed that Danny was shifting restlessly, making small sounds of discomfort. He approached quietly and placed his hand on Danny's forehead. His skin was burning hot. "Guys, wake up," Mike called urgently, his voice cutting through the peaceful atmosphere. "Danny's burning up with fever." The men stirred immediately, their military training kicking in as they responded to the alarm in their leader's voice. Within seconds, 24 bikers were gathered around the couch, their faces etched with concern as they looked down at their friend. "What do we do?" asked Pete, his voice tight with worry. "This is bad, Mike. Really bad. Should we try to get him to a hospital?" suggested Jake, his voice laced with anxiety. "Maybe the roads are clear enough now." Mike shook his head grimly, his gaze grim. "Roads are still blocked solid. I checked an hour ago. We're not getting anywhere until this storm passes completely." Tommy knelt beside the couch and touched Danny's face gently, his brow furrowed. "He's burning up. This isn't just a regular fever. In Afghanistan, when guys got fevers like this, the medics would." One of the younger men started, then trailed off helplessly. "But we don't have any medics here. We need to cool him down somehow," said Mike, his voice betraying his uncertainty. "But I don't know how. Hell, I don't know anything about taking care of sick people." The men looked at each other with growing panic, their expressions mirroring their helplessness. These were hardened individuals who had faced combat, who had survived dangerous situations across the globe. But the sight of their friend burning up with fever had reduced them to a state of bewildered fear. "What if he gets worse?" whispered Pete, his voice trembling. "What if we lose him?" "We're not losing anybody," Mike said firmly, his voice laced with a desperate resolve. But Kesha could hear the fear beneath his determined words, a vulnerability that touched her heart. From her spot in the kitchen, Kesha had been listening to their increasingly frantic conversation. She watched these strong men grapple with their friend's condition, saw the genuine terror in their eyes at the thought of losing Danny. Their helplessness was heartbreaking. She stepped forward quietly, her voice gentle. "Mike, I can help." All 24 men turned to look at her, their expressions a mixture of hope and desperation. "You know about this stuff?" Mike asked, not even attempting to conceal the relief in his voice. "Some. My mother was a nurse before she opened her restaurant. She taught me how to handle fevers and basic medical care." "Please," said Tommy, his voice breaking slightly, his gaze imploring. "We don't know what to do. We'll try anything." Kesha looked around at the circle of worried faces. These were men who had faced the horrors of war, who had endured unimaginable hardships. But the sight of their friend succumbing to a fever had rendered them helpless, their tough exteriors melting away to reveal their shared humanity. They reminded her of Marcus when he was scared, looking to her for comfort and reassurance. "It's okay," she said calmly, her voice a soothing balm. "Fever is the body's way of fighting infection. We just need to keep him cool and make sure he stays hydrated." She disappeared into the bathroom and returned with a basin of cool water and several washcloths. Settling herself on the edge of the couch beside Danny, she began gently bathing his face and neck with the cool cloths, her touch both gentle and firm. "Danny, honey, can you hear me?" she said softly, her voice filled with compassion. His eyes fluttered open, glassy and unfocused. Where am I? You're safe, Kesha replied, her voice adopting the gentle tone she used with Marcus when he was ill. You're in my house, and your friends are here. You have a fever, but I'm going to take care of you. For the next several hours, Kesha moved between the kitchen and the living room, boiling water for tea, preparing cool compresses, and monitoring Danny's temperature. The other bikers watched her work with a quiet awe, their faces etched with admiration. She moved with a quiet efficiency, her hands steady and sure as she tended to their friend. Mama, Danny mumbled during one of his delirious moments, reaching out blindly. Without hesitation, Kesha took his hand in hers, her touch reassuring. I'm here, baby. You're going to be fine. Mike stood in the doorway, watching this exchange, his expression unreadable. When Kesha looked up and caught his eye, she saw something there that made her heart flutter, a feeling both unexpected and profound. Respect, certainly, and gratitude, but also something deeper, a flicker of recognition, as if he was seeing something in her that he had been searching for, but hadn't dared to hope he would find. Around 3 a.m, Danny's fever finally broke. His breathing became easier, and the tight lines of pain around his eyes relaxed. Kesha felt his forehead one more time and smiled with relief. He's going to be okay, she announced to the room full of anxious men, her voice filled with hope. The fever's broken. He should sleep peacefully now. A collective sigh of relief rippled through the room. Pete actually wiped his eyes with the back of his hand, his voice choked with emotion, and Tommy patted Kesha's shoulder with gentle gratitude. You saved his life, Mike said quietly, his gaze intense. We wouldn't have known what to do. He saved mine too, Kesha replied, her eyes shining with unshed tears. All of you did. I haven't felt this useful, this needed, in a very long time. As dawn approached, the storm outside finally began to show signs of weakening. The wind had died down to a steady whisper, and the snow was falling more gently. The men began to stir, checking the weather reports and discussing their departure. Mike found Kesha in the kitchen, where she was preparing coffee and scrambled eggs for breakfast. We'll be leaving soon, he said, his voice filled with a quiet resolve. Roads should be passable in a few hours. Kesha nodded, surprised by how much the thought of their departure saddened her. I'll pack some food for the road. You've got a long ride ahead of you. Kesha, Mike said, his voice serious, his gaze unwavering. What you did for us, for Danny. We don't forget things like that. We take care of people who take care of us. She looked up from the eggs she was scrambling, meeting his intense gaze. I didn't do anything special. Anyone would have done the same. Mike shook his head slowly, his expression filled with admiration. No, they wouldn't. Most people would have left us out in that storm. Most people see us and cross to the other side of the street. But you opened your door. You fed us. You healed our friend. You treated us like family. You are family, Kesha, she said simply, her heart overflowing with emotion. At least, you feel like family to me. When the time came for them to leave, the goodbyes were more emotional than anyone had anticipated. Each man shook Kesha's hand or hugged her gently, thanking her with words that seemed inadequate for the depth of their gratitude. Marcus cried when Tommy had to leave, clinging to the older man's leather jacket with heartbreaking determination. I'll see you again, little man, Tommy promised, his own voice thick with emotion. That's a promise. Mike was the last to leave. He pressed an envelope into Kesha's hands, despite her protests. It's not charity, he said firmly, his gaze unwavering. It's payment for services rendered. You're a healer, and healers deserve to be compensated for their work. I can't take your money, Kesha said, trying to hand the envelope back, her voice filled with protest. You can, and you will. We don't leave debts unpaid. His expression softened slightly, a hint of warmth in his eyes. Besides, that little restaurant of yours, the one with your mother's recipes? Don't give up on it. Good food and good hearts like yours will find their way to each other. Kesha stood in her doorway, holding Marcus on her hip, watching the 25 motorcycles disappear into the gray morning mist. The envelope in her pocket felt heavy with possibility, but heavier still was the knowledge that she was once again alone. The house felt enormous and silent after they left, the absence of their laughter and their warmth palpable. She and Marcus ate breakfast in a kitchen that seemed too big for just 2 people, but something had shifted during the night. The loneliness was still there, but it felt different now, less like a permanent condition and more like a temporary state of being. "Mama," Marcus said, pointing toward the door, his voice filled with longing. "Friends, come back." Kesha looked at her son's hopeful face and smiled, her heart aching with tenderness. "I don't know, baby, but if they need us, I think they will." She opened the envelope Mike had given her and gasped, her eyes widening in astonishment. There was more money inside than she had made in 3 months at any of her previous jobs, enough to pay her rent, fix her heater, and maybe even buy some proper equipment for her restaurant. But more valuable than the money was the note written in Mike's careful handwriting, a simple message that touched her soul. "For Mama Kesha, who showed us what family really means. We won't forget the brotherhood." For the first time in years, Kesha Williams went to bed, believing that tomorrow might actually be better than today, a glimmer of hope flickering in the darkness. 3 days after the Hells Angels had vanished into the gray morning, Kesha's house felt like a tomb, the silence pressing against her ears with an almost physical weight, broken only by Marcus's occasional babbling as he played with his toys. She had grown so accustomed to the sound of 25 voices, the gentle rumble of conversation, and the warmth of shared meals, that the emptiness now felt suffocating, a profound sense of loss pervading the air. The money Mike had left sat on her kitchen table in neat stacks, $800, more than she had seen at one time in years, enough to pay the overdue electric bill, buy groceries for a month, and maybe even fix the malfunctioning heater. But somehow, looking at those bills felt like staring at the remnants of a beautiful dream that was already fading, the vibrant colors of hope slowly bleeding away into the gray reality of her everyday life. She had tried to restart her restaurant business, using some of the money to buy fresh ingredients and crafting a new sign for her window, a beacon of hope in the desolate landscape of her struggling existence. But the cruel reality hadn't changed, and despite her efforts, no customers had walked through her door. The tantalizing smell of her mother's fried chicken filled the house with nostalgic memories and the promise of a brighter future, but hope didn't pay the bills, and nostalgia didn't feed a hungry child, and the weight of her responsibilities threatened to crush her spirit. By the 4th day, the food she had lovingly prepared was beginning to spoil, a heartbreaking reminder of her dashed dreams. Marcus had developed a cold, a relentless cough that racked his small body, leaving him fussy and clingy, crying for hours despite her desperate attempts to comfort him. The house felt colder somehow, the warmth the bikers had brought with them having been sucked out through the cracks in the walls when they left, leaving behind a chilling emptiness that echoed her own loneliness. "Mama, hungry?" Marcus whimpered from his high chair, his voice weak and plaintive, a reminder of the enormous weight of her responsibility. The air hung thick with unspoken anxieties, a fragile peace shattered by the scrape of a chair against the linoleum. He pushed away the small offering, the carefully prepared scrambled eggs she had hoped would tempt him. 3 meals he had refused, a silent protest from a body ravaged by illness, and Kesha felt the first icy tendrils of panic coil around her heart. She opened the refrigerator, its meager contents a stark reflection of their dwindling resources. The milk, almost gone, a luxury she couldn't afford to replenish until she could somehow stretch Mike's contribution further. The sight of her child, her hungry child, refusing food because his small body was too weak, too burdened by sickness, sent a familiar wave of desperation through her. "Come on, baby," she pleaded softly, her voice laced with a warmth she hoped could penetrate his misery. "Just a little bit for Mama." Marcus turned his head, a small act of defiance that broke her heart anew, and began to cry. A thin, wailing sound, barely audible, yet it seemed to echo off the bare, empty walls of their small apartment, amplifying her despair. His nose ran, a constant stream she wiped away with a gentle hand, and his small body shook with each sob, a fragile frame trembling under the weight of his illness. Kesha picked him up, holding him close, feeling the heat radiating from his skin, the unmistakable sign of a rising fever. Her gaze fell on the small pile of money on the table, a stark reminder of the impossible choice looming before her. Medicine and nourishment for Marcus, or the rent, due in 2 weeks, a roof over their heads. There wasn't enough for both. The question was, in truth, no question at all. Her son always came first, a primal instinct, a love that eclipsed all else. She bundled Marcus in his warmest coat, a threadbare garment that offered little protection against the biting cold, and stepped outside into the harsh afternoon air. The walk to Mrs. Henderson's house felt like a march to execution, a slow, agonizing journey to a place where hope seemed to wither and die. But she had run out of options, exhausted every other avenue. Mrs. Henderson was the closest neighbor, and despite their previous, unpleasant encounter, she remained Kesha's best, perhaps only, hope for help. The older woman's house stood in stark contrast to their own humble dwelling, a testament to order and prosperity. It was neat and well-maintained, with a perfectly manicured lawn that, even in the dead of winter, looked healthier and more vibrant than Kesha's yard ever had. She climbed the front steps, each footfall heavy with apprehension, carrying Marcus on her hip, his fevered face buried against her shoulder. He was a dead weight, a constant reminder of her helplessness. She knocked, the sound echoing in the cold air, and waited. Mrs. Henderson answered after the third knock, her expression immediately souring when she saw who stood on her porch. "What do you want?" she asked, her voice sharp, devoid of warmth or empathy. She didn't bother with pleasantries, didn't even acknowledge the sick child nestled in Kesha's arms. "Mrs. Henderson, I'm sorry to bother you," Kesha began, her voice trembling slightly. "But my son is sick, and I was wondering if you might have some children's medicine I could borrow, or maybe just a little milk I can pay you back as soon as—" "Absolutely not." Mrs. Henderson's voice was like a shard of ice, sharp enough to cut through glass. "I told you before, I don't want anything to do with your kind of trouble." "Please," Kesha pleaded, hearing the desperation creep into her voice, a raw, vulnerable sound she couldn't control. "He's just a baby. He has a fever, and I need to get some medicine in him. But I can't afford both medicine and milk, and he won't take the medicine without. That's not my problem." Mrs. Henderson started to close the door, a decisive act of rejection that made Kesha's heart sink. But she couldn't give up, not yet. She stepped forward, her hand reaching out instinctively, a desperate plea for compassion. "Wait, please. I'm begging you. Just this once. They'll do anything." Mrs. Henderson's face twisted with disgust, her eyes filled with a venom that made Kesha flinch. "Get your hands off my door and get off my property before I call the police." "Mrs. Henderson, please. He's burning up. I said get off my property." The older woman shoved Kesha backward with surprising force, a brutal act of dismissal that sent her reeling. Already off balance from carrying Marcus, Kesha stumbled down the front steps and fell hard onto the frozen sidewalk. Marcus screamed as they hit the ground, a piercing cry of pain and fear, and Kesha felt a sharp pain shoot through her elbow where it had struck the concrete. "Stay away from decent people," Mrs. Henderson called from her doorway, her voice dripping with contempt. "Take your bastard child and your welfare problems somewhere else. This is a respectable neighborhood." The door slammed shut with a finality that echoed through Kesha's chest like a physical blow, leaving her breathless and shaken. She sat on the cold sidewalk, the icy concrete seeping into her bones, holding her crying son, feeling the sting of tears on her cheeks and the deeper sting of humiliation in her heart, a wound that ran far deeper than the throbbing pain in her elbow. "Mama hurt," Marcus sobbed, reaching up to touch her face with a small, trembling hand. "I know, baby. Mama's hurt, too." She struggled to her feet, her elbow throbbing, her pride shattered into pieces she wasn't sure she could ever put back together. The walk home felt endless, a slow, agonizing journey through a landscape of despair. Marcus' weight seemed to increase with every step, a heavy burden on her already aching body, and the cold seeped through her worn coat like a living thing, chilling her to the core. As she passed the last house on the block, a small, unassuming dwelling she had never really noticed before, she heard a voice call out behind her. "Honey, are you all right?" Kesha turned to see an elderly black woman standing in the doorway, her figure silhouetted against the warm light emanating from within. The woman looked to be in her 70s, her silver hair pulled back in a neat bun, her kind eyes filled with concern. "I saw what happened over there," the woman said, stepping out onto her porch despite the cold, a small act of defiance against the biting wind. "That Henderson woman is nothing but meanness wrapped up in Sunday clothes. You come here, child. Both of you look like you need some help." Kesha hesitated, wary after the cruel rejection she had just experienced. Kindness felt almost foreign, a distant memory she could barely recall. But Marcus was still burning with fever, his small body trembling in her arms, and she was out of options, with nowhere else to turn. "I don't want to be any trouble," she said weakly, her voice barely above a whisper. "Trouble?" The woman laughed, a warm, comforting sound that seemed to chase away some of the cold. "Honey, helping folks in need isn't trouble. It's what we're supposed to do. I'm Martha, and you're coming inside right now before that baby catches pneumonia." Martha's house was small but immaculately clean, filled with the comforting aroma of fresh bread and something else, something intangible that reminded Kesha of her mother's kitchen, a feeling of family, of love, of home. "Sit yourself down right there," Martha instructed, pointing to a comfortable armchair near the fireplace, where a warm fire crackled merrily. "Let me look at this little angel." Martha examined Marcus with the gentle expertise of someone who had raised children of her own. She checked his temperature with a practiced hand, looked in his throat with a knowing gaze, and listened to his breathing with an old stethoscope she pulled from a kitchen drawer. "He's got a little cold, but nothing that won't clear up with some rest and proper care," she announced, her voice filled with reassurance. "I've got children's medicine in the bathroom, and there's fresh milk in the refrigerator. You just sit tight while I get everything together." Kesha watched in amazement as Martha bustled around her kitchen, a whirlwind of warmth and efficiency, preparing warm milk with honey, gathering medicine, and even wrapping up some of the fresh bread she had been baking. The older woman moved with the practiced ease of someone accustomed to taking care of people, and her kindness felt like a warm blanket after hours in the cold, a balm for her wounded spirit. "Why are you helping us?" Kesha asked quietly as Martha handed her the medicine for Marcus, her voice filled with gratitude and disbelief. Martha paused, her hand lingering on a silver necklace that hung around her neck, a piece she often fiddled with when deep in thought. It was an unusual piece, old-looking, with intricate engravings that caught the firelight and seemed to hold a story within their delicate lines. "Because I know what it's like to be alone and scared with a sick child," Martha said simply, her eyes filled with a deep understanding. "And because my mama always told me that kindness comes back to you when you need it most." She pressed a small envelope into Kesha's hands along with a bag of groceries, her touch gentle and reassuring. "This should help with whatever bills are pressing on you. And don't you dare try to refuse it. I've got more money than I need and no children to spend it on." Marcus had already begun to perk up after taking the medicine, his small body relaxing in Martha's warm embrace, and he was currently fascinated by a small music box Martha had given him to play with, its delicate melody filling the room with a sense of peace. The sight of her son smiling for the first time in days made Kesha's eyes fill with tears, a mixture of gratitude, relief, and overwhelming emotion. "I don't know how to thank you," she whispered, her voice choked with emotion. "You don't need to thank me, honey. You just take care of that beautiful baby and remember that there are still good people in this world. More good than bad, even if it doesn't always feel that way." As Kesha walked home with Marcus in her arms and Martha's gifts in her hands, she felt something she hadn't experienced in months, a flicker of warmth igniting within her frozen heart. Hope, real, tangible hope that maybe, just maybe, everything was going to be okay. She couldn't possibly know that just 3 days later her quiet street would be filled with the thunder of 1,500 motorcycles, a mechanical symphony that would shake the very foundations of her life. Or that the kindness Martha had shown her, a simple act of compassion in a moment of desperation, would turn out to be connected to the kindness she had shown 25 strangers during a blinding snowstorm, a ripple effect of good deeds that would change her life forever. Sometimes the universe works in mysterious ways, weaving intricate tapestries of fate that are too perfect to be mere coincidence. And sometimes the smallest acts of compassion, offered freely and without expectation, create ripples that travel farther than anyone could possibly imagine, reaching across boundaries and connecting hearts in ways that defy explanation. 3 days had passed since Martha's kindness had pulled Kesha back from the brink of despair, a lifeline thrown in a sea of uncertainty. Marcus was feeling much better, his fever completely gone, his cheeks flushed with color, and his appetite returned with a vengeance, demanding food with the boundless energy of a healthy child. The medicine and care had worked their magic, banishing the shadows of illness, and he was back to his cheerful, curious self, babbling happily as he played with the small toys Martha had given him, his laughter a sweet melody that filled the small apartment. Kesha had used Martha's money wisely, stretching every dollar to its limit, buying groceries to fill their empty cupboards and paying the most urgent bills, staving off the immediate threat of eviction. The envelope had contained $200, a small fortune in her eyes, and a note written in careful, elegant handwriting, a message of hope from a kindred spirit. "For a mother who reminds me of myself at your age," it read. "Keep your chin up, honey. Better days are coming." She was in the kitchen preparing lunch, humming softly to herself as she chopped vegetables, when she felt it. A vibration, so faint at first that she thought it might be a large truck passing by on the main road, a rumble beneath her feet. But the trembling didn't stop. Instead, it grew stronger, traveling up through the floorboards and into the soles of her feet, a deep, resonant hum that seemed to resonate within her very bones. Marcus looked up from his toys, his eyes wide with curiosity. "Mama, what that?" he asked, his small voice filled with wonder. The vibration intensified, growing more pronounced, until the dishes in her cabinets began to rattle softly, a gentle chime that was quickly drowned out by the growing rumble. Kesha moved to the front window, her heart pounding with a strange premonition, and peered through the curtains, her breath catching in her throat. But the street appeared empty, bathed in the soft afternoon light, deceptively peaceful. Yet the rumbling sound was growing louder, deeper, like distant thunder that refused to move on, a storm gathering on the horizon. Then she saw them. They appeared at the far end of Maple Street, like a vision from another world, a phantasm emerging from the depths of her imagination. Motorcycles, dozens of them, gleaming chrome reflecting the sunlight, their engines purring with pent-up power. No, not dozens. Hundreds. An endless line of chrome and steel that stretched back beyond what she could see. A mechanical serpent winding its way through the quiet residential neighborhood, flowing toward her house like a mechanical river, a force of nature unleashed. "Oh my God," she whispered, her hand flying to her mouth, her eyes wide with disbelief. As they drew closer, she realized with growing amazement that the lead motorcycles had reached her house and were beginning to arrange themselves in precise formations along both sides of the street, parking in perfect unison, a display of orchestrated power. Behind them came more and more, an unending stream of motorcycles, until the quiet residential road looked like the staging area for the world's largest motorcycle rally, a spectacle that defied belief. The thunderous rumble of 1,500 Harley-Davidson engines created a sound unlike anything Kesha had ever experienced, a mechanical symphony that seemed to shake the very air around her, a palpable force that vibrated through her soul. Marcus had climbed onto a chair to look out the window, his face lit with excitement, clapping his hands with delight at the spectacle unfolding before him. "Big bikes, Mama, so many big bikes," he exclaimed, his small voice filled with pure, unadulterated joy. Kesha stood frozen in her doorway, her mind struggling to process what she was seeing, trying to make sense of the impossible scene unfolding before her eyes. The motorcycles continued to arrive, their riders dismounting and arranging themselves in orderly lines, a disciplined force that radiated an aura of quiet strength. These weren't random bikers who had happened upon her street, a chance encounter on a sunny afternoon. This was organized, a carefully planned event orchestrated with meticulous precision. This was intentional, a purposeful act of solidarity and support. This was about her, a response to her kindness that had grown into something far beyond anything she could have imagined. The front door of every house on Maple Street opened as neighbors emerged from their dwellings, drawn by the noise and commotion, their faces etched with curiosity and disbelief. Mrs. Henderson stood on her perfectly manicured lawn, her face pale with shock, her mouth agape, her eyes wide with a mixture of fear and apprehension. Other neighbors gathered in small groups, pointing and whispering among themselves, their expressions ranging from amazement to terror, struggling to comprehend the extraordinary scene unfolding before them. At the head of the massive formation, Kesha recognized a familiar figure, a face that had haunted her thoughts since that fateful night in the snow. Mike sat astride his bike, his broad shoulders radiating power, his gaze fixed on her with an intensity that made her heart pound. But he wasn't alone. Beside him were Tommy, Jake, Pete, and all the others who had sought refuge in her home during that blizzard, their faces etched with gratitude and determination. Behind them were hundreds more men and women, a diverse group of individuals united by a common bond, wearing the same leather jackets, the same patches emblazoned with the club's insignia, the same expression of quiet determination. Mike dismounted his bike with a fluid grace, his boots hitting the pavement with a solid thud, and began walking toward her house, his every step deliberate and purposeful. As he moved, the 1,500 engines behind him fell silent in perfect unison, creating a silence so complete that it felt almost supernatural, a dramatic pause that amplified the tension in the air. The sudden absence of sound was somehow more impressive than the thunder had been, a testament to the power of collective action. "Kesha," Mike called out, his voice clear and strong, carrying easily in the still air, a resonant baritone that commanded attention. "We need to talk." She stepped out onto her porch, Marcus on her hip, feeling the eyes of 1,500 bikers and dozens of neighbors focused on her, an intense scrutiny that made her skin prickle. The magnitude of the moment pressed down on her like a physical weight, a burden of expectation that threatened to overwhelm her. Mike, what is this? Why are you all here?" She stammered, her voice barely audible, her mind racing to make sense of the extraordinary scene. He stopped at the bottom of her front steps, his expression serious, but not threatening, his gaze unwavering. Behind him, the massive formation of motorcycles and riders waited with military precision, a silent army poised for action. "We told you we don't forget," he said simply, his voice filled with a quiet intensity. "And we don't leave debts unpaid." A murmur ran through the crowd of neighbors, a ripple of curiosity and speculation, and Kesha could see Mrs. Henderson edging closer, her curiosity apparently overcoming her fear, drawn to the spectacle despite herself. "I don't understand," Kesha said, though part of her was beginning to suspect that something extraordinary was about to happen, a miracle unfolding before her very eyes. Tommy appeared beside Mike, his smile warm and genuine, carrying a large manila envelope, its contents promising salvation. "Kesha, that night, you saved our lives. You fed us. You healed Danny. You treated us like family when the whole world treats us like criminals." "We've been busy these past 3 days," added Jake, his usual jovial demeanor replaced by something more solemn, a gravity that underscored the significance of the moment. "Making phone calls, calling in favors, reaching out to every chapter from here to California." Mike gestured toward the assembled crowd behind him, a sweeping gesture that encompassed the entire biker nation. "These are our brothers and sisters from across the country. Detroit, Chicago, Milwaukee, Cleveland, Pittsburgh. When we told them about what you did, about who you are, they wanted to meet you, to show their respect and their gratitude." A woman biker near the front of the formation stepped forward, her presence radiating confidence and strength. She was tall and commanding, with graying hair pulled back in a tight braid and kind eyes that reminded Kesha somehow of her mother, a sense of warmth and reassurance emanating from her. "I'm Sarah from the Chicago chapter," she said, her voice warm but strong, cutting through the air with a clarity that demanded attention. "We heard about a woman who opened her door to 25 strangers in a blizzard, a selfless act of compassion that defied all logic. We heard about a mother who saved a young man's life with nothing but kindness and home remedies," added another biker, this one from Cleveland, his voice rough but sincere. "Word travels fast in our community, especially when it's a story of courage and resilience. Stories about real kindness, real courage, they spread like wildfire," Sarah chimed in. Mike reached into his jacket and pulled out a thick envelope, its weight substantial, its contents promising a brighter future. "Kesha, this is from all of us. Every chapter contributed, pooling their resources to alleviate your burden. It's enough to pay off every debt you have, fix up this house, and get your restaurant running properly," he continued, his voice filled with hope. Kesha stared at the envelope, her mind struggling to process what was happening, her heart overflowing with gratitude and disbelief. "I can't take this. It's too much. I just did what anyone would do," she stammered, her voice choked with emotion. "No, said Tommy firmly, his gaze unwavering. "You did what almost no one would do, and that makes all the difference." The sound of news vans could be heard in the distance, their engines growing louder, adding to the mechanical chorus that filled the air. Word was spreading quickly that something unprecedented was happening on Maple Street, a story of extraordinary generosity that was captivating the nation. "There's more," Mike continued, his voice rising above the noise, his gaze fixed on Kesha. "We've got contractors, electricians, plumbers, all riding with us, skilled professionals who have volunteered their time and expertise. We're going to fix this house properly, make it into the kind of restaurant it deserves to be," he declared, his voice filled with passion. Sarah stepped forward again, her smile warm and reassuring. "And we've got a marketing plan, social media, word of mouth, food bloggers, a team of experts ready to spread the word. By the time we're done, everyone in Detroit is going to know about Mama Kesha's kitchen," she added, her voice brimming with enthusiasm. Kesha felt tears streaming down her cheeks, unchecked, as the magnitude of their generosity hit her, the weight of their kindness almost unbearable. These people, who had been strangers just days before, had organized a support network that spanned multiple states, mobilizing an army of good Samaritans to transform her life. They had turned her small act of kindness, a simple gesture of compassion offered in a moment of crisis, into something that would change her life forever, a testament to the power of human connection. "Why?" she whispered, her voice barely audible, her heart overflowing with emotion. "Why would you do all this for me?" Mike's expression softened, and for a moment she saw not the intimidating leader of a motorcycle club, but the grieving father who had lost his daughter, the man who had found solace in her home. "Because you showed us what family really means," he said quietly, his voice filled with emotion. "You showed us that kindness still exists in this world, a beacon of hope in a sea of darkness. And because sometimes when someone saves your life, you get the chance to save theirs right back," he added, his voice filled with a quiet conviction. The crowd of neighbors had grown larger, their faces etched with curiosity and awe, their expressions ranging from disbelief to admiration. Kesha could see camera phones recording everything, capturing the unfolding drama for the world to see. Mrs. Henderson stood at the edge of her lawn, her face a mask of confusion and what might have been the beginning of shame, her gaze shifting nervously between the bikers and the growing crowd. Marcus wiggled in her arms, wanting to get down and see the motorcycles up close, his small body vibrating with excitement. Tommy stepped forward with a gentle smile, his eyes filled with warmth. "Can I?" he asked, and when Kesha nodded, trusting him implicitly, he took Marcus in his arms, cradling him gently. The toddler immediately began pointing at the bikes and chattering excitedly, his face lit with pure joy. "Big bikes. So many big bikes," he exclaimed, his small voice filled with wonder. "That's right, little man," Tommy said warmly, his heart touched by the child's innocence. "And every single one of them came here because your mama is the bravest, kindest woman we know," he added, his voice filled with admiration. As if responding to some invisible signal, a silent command that resonated through the crowd, the 1,500 bikers began to move, their actions coordinated with military precision. They didn't mount their motorcycles or rev their engines, shattering the peaceful silence. Instead, they began walking toward Kesha's house, each one carrying something, a symbol of their commitment to her cause, a tangible expression of their gratitude. Tools, building supplies, paint, lumber, kitchen equipment, everything needed to transform her small home into a proper restaurant, a place where dreams could take flight and where hope could flourish. "We're going to get to work," Mike announced, his voice booming with authority, his gaze sweeping across the assembled crowd. "And we're not leaving until Mama Kesha's kitchen is ready to serve the best soul food in Detroit." The transformation of Maple Street from a quiet residential road into a construction site unlike anything the neighborhood had ever seen was about to begin, a whirlwind of activity fueled by generosity and a shared sense of purpose. And at the center of it all stood a single mother, a woman who had opened her door to strangers in a storm, never imagining that her kindness would summon an army of angels on motorcycles, a force of nature ready to transform her life. Within an hour, Kesha's quiet street had transformed into something resembling a small-town festival. a celebration of community and compassion. The 1500 Hells Angels, a force to be reckoned with, had organized themselves with military precision, their actions coordinated with seamless efficiency, creating work crews that tackled different aspects of renovating her house. Some focused on the exterior, repairing the dilapidated facade, and adding a fresh coat of paint, while others concentrated on plumbing and electrical work, ensuring that everything was up to code and safe for operation. A dedicated team worked on expanding and modernizing her small kitchen, transforming it into a professional-grade culinary space that would allow her to create her signature soul food with ease and efficiency. The neighbors, initially shocked into silence, their faces etched with disbelief, had gradually emerged from their houses, drawn by the noise and commotion, eager to witness the unprecedented spectacle unfolding before their eyes. Word had spread quickly through the community, carried on the wings of curiosity, and people from blocks away were walking over to see what was happening, their faces filled with wonder. Children pressed their faces against windows, wide-eyed at the sight of so many motorcycles lined up like mechanical soldiers, a symbol of power and freedom. Local news vans had arrived, their satellite dishes reaching toward the sky, their cameras capturing every moment, as reporters attempted to make sense of the story unfolding before them, a narrative of extraordinary generosity that was capturing the hearts of the nation. Camera crews captured every moment, documenting the transformation in detail, as leather-clad bikers wielded hammers and paintbrushes with the same skill and precision they handled their motorcycles, their actions a testament to their versatility and their unwavering commitment. Mrs. Henderson stood at the edge of her perfectly manicured lawn, her expression cycling between confusion, fear, and what might have been the beginning of recognition that she had badly misjudged the situation, her heart filled with regret. She kept glancing between the organized chaos in Kesha's yard and the growing crowd of curious neighbors, her face pale and drawn, her posture conveying a sense of unease. "I can't believe this is happening," whispered Mrs. Johnson from 2 houses down, her voice filled with awe. "All these bikers just to help one woman. It's unbelievable." "Did you hear what she did?" replied Mr. Davis, an elderly man who rarely spoke to anyone, his eyes twinkling with admiration. "Apparently, she saved their lives in that big snowstorm last week. Fed them, took care of them when they were stranded. She opened her home to them when no one else would." "Kesha did that?" Mrs. Johnson looked surprised, her eyebrows raised in disbelief. "I had no idea she was even capable of." Her voice trailed off as she realized what she was about to say, a subtle judgment that reflected her own assumptions about her neighbor, her own preconceived notions. In the midst of all this activity, amidst the organized chaos and the outpouring of support, Martha appeared at the edge of the crowd, her presence radiating warmth and wisdom. The elderly woman had walked over from her small house, drawn by the noise and commotion like everyone else, her heart filled with curiosity and concern. She stood at the back of the gathering, her silver hair catching the afternoon light, her eyes sparkling with joy, watching the proceedings with quiet satisfaction, her soul at peace. Kesha was standing near her front porch, still overwhelmed by the magnitude of what was happening around her, struggling to absorb the reality of the situation. Marcus had been claimed by Tommy, his new best friend, and was currently getting a tour of the motorcycles, his delighted squeals audible over the sounds of construction, his laughter a melody that warmed Kesha's heart. "This is incredible," Sarah from the Chicago chapter said, appearing beside Kesha with a clipboard covered in notes, her energy infectious. "We've got the kitchen renovation mapped out, the dining room expansion planned, and enough volunteers to have everything finished by tomorrow evening. We work fast, and we work hard. This is going to be spectacular." "Tomorrow?" Kesha shook her head in amazement, her eyes wide with disbelief. "That's impossible. There's so much to do." "Honey, you haven't seen what happens when 1,500 motivated bikers decide to get something done," Sarah laughed, her voice filled with confidence. "We once built an entire playground in 6 hours for a children's hospital in Milwaukee. Anything is possible with the right amount of determination and a shared sense of purpose." Danny emerged from the house looking much healthier than he had during that terrible night when his fever had spiked, his face flushed with energy, his eyes sparkling with gratitude. He was carrying a toolbox and had paint streaks on his clothes, evidence that he had been working on the interior renovations, contributing his skills to the transformation of Kesha's home. When he spotted Kesha, he walked over with a broad smile, his presence radiating warmth and sincerity. "The kitchen is going to be amazing," he told her enthusiastically, his voice filled with excitement. "Professional-grade stove, expanded prep area, even a new freezer unit. You'll be able to handle 50 customers easy, and with your talent, that's going to be easy." "Danny, I still can't believe you all did this," Kesha said, her voice thick with emotion, tears welling up in her eyes. "After everything I put you through that night, I am so grateful." "Put us through?" Danny looked genuinely confused, his brow furrowed. "Kesha, you saved my life. If you hadn't known how to break that fever, I could have died in that house. I was so sick, so worried, but you took care of me." As he spoke, his hand unconsciously moved to touch something at his throat, a subconscious gesture of gratitude and connection. It was then that Kesha noticed he was wearing a necklace she hadn't seen before, a piece that seemed to hold a special significance. It was silver, old-looking, with intricate engravings that caught the light, a delicate piece that radiated an aura of mystery. "That's a beautiful necklace," she observed, her voice filled with genuine admiration. Danny's expression grew soft and sad, his eyes filled with a bittersweet memory. "It belonged to my mother," he said quietly, his voice filled with longing. "I lost her when I was 7, got separated from her during a fire at our apartment building. This necklace was the only thing I had left of her. The family that took me and let me keep it, but I never found her again," he added, his voice filled with a quiet sorrow. From somewhere behind them in the crowd, a voice, laced with a mixture of hope and trepidation, pierced through the noise, rising above the din of construction. "Danny, have you ever felt utterly lost, adrift in a sea of uncertainty, yearning for a connection you thought lost forever?" They collided, not in a crash, but in a cascade of tears, a torrent released after decades dammed by doubt and longing, unable to speak, only to sob, to cling, to finally, impossibly, be one again. 30 years of searching, 30 years of silent questions echoing in the empty spaces of their hearts. 30 years of clinging to the faintest glimmer of hope against the crushing weight of despair, all dissolved, vanished, like morning mist under the warm caress of the sun. Around them, a tableau of hardened bikers and bewildered neighbors stood frozen, witnesses to a miracle, a reunion orchestrated by fate, a story too incredible to be believed, yet unfolding before their very eyes. Mr. Mike, his own eyes glistening with unshed tears, stepped forward, his voice thick with emotion. "Martha," he began, hesitantly, his gaze tender, "you are Danny's mother." A wave of recognition washed over Martha's face, her embrace tightening around her son. "I am," she affirmed, her voice trembling with relief and joy, her arms an unbreakable circle around the boy she had thought lost to the world. "And you," Mr. Tommy said simply, stepping forward, his voice rough with emotion, "are the family who cared for him, protected him, loved him all these years. We are his brothers." He paused, then spoke the words that would forever bind them together. "And that makes you our mother too." The emotional gravity of that moment radiated outwards, a ripple of empathy spreading through the astonished crowd. Weathered bikers, men known for their stoicism and grit, openly wiped away tears that streamed down their leathery faces. Neighbors, who had for so long remained strangers, separated by invisible walls of indifference, found themselves embracing, drawn together by an invisible thread of shared humanity. Even the jaded news crews, hardened by years of witnessing the world's sorrows, lowered their cameras, captivated by the raw power of a family reunited, a love story written in tears and whispered prayers. Mrs. Henderson, her face etched with confusion and disbelief, pushed her way through the throng, her voice trembling with a mixture of shock and dawning understanding. "I don't understand," she stammered, her eyes darting between Martha and Danny, between the bikers and the neighbors. "How is this possible? What are the odds?" Kesha, her heart overflowing with compassion, looked at the woman who had so recently treated her with such disdain, the woman who had callously shoved her to the ground, the woman who had hurled cruel words at her child, the woman who had turned a blind eye, when help was so desperately needed. Yet, surprisingly, the anger she expected to feel never surfaced. Instead, a feeling akin to pity, a gentle wave of understanding washed over her. Sometimes, Kesha said softly, her voice filled with a quiet wisdom, kindness finds its way home. Sometimes, when you extend a helping hand to someone else, you are unknowingly helping yourself. Martha, momentarily breaking free from her embrace with Danny, her eyes locking with Kesha's across the expanse of the crowd, a sudden realization dawning in her gaze. "You," she said, her voice filled with profound gratitude. "You are the woman who saved my son's life. You are the reason he survived that terrible fever. And you are the woman who saved Marcus's and my lives when we had nowhere else to turn." Kesha, her heart swelling with emotion, replied with a gentle smile. "I guess we have been taking care of each other's children without even knowing it." A thunderous roar erupted from the crowd, a chorus of cheers and applause mingling with the deafening rev of over 1,000 motorcycles as the Hells Angels, those unlikely angels of fate, celebrated the impossible reunion they had inadvertently orchestrated. In the span of a single week, a fierce blizzard, a single act of heartfelt kindness, and a community of unexpected allies had conspired to bring together a mother and son, separated by circumstance and time, who had spent 3 long decades desperately searching for each other. Mrs. Henderson, standing on the periphery of the jubilant celebration, her eyes wide with wonder, watched the unfolding scene with a mixture of awe and regret. For the first time in many years, a sliver of understanding pierced through the hardened shell around her heart. She began to comprehend the profound sense of community, of belonging, that she had been missing by keeping her heart closed to her neighbors, by refusing to embrace the beauty of human connection. The spontaneous celebration that erupted in the wake of Martha and Danny's reunion seemed to infuse the entire street with a palpable energy, a vibrant current of hope and joy. What had initially begun as a simple construction project, a humble attempt to repair a dilapidated house, had blossomed into something far greater, something akin to a neighborhood festival, with the Hells Angels working shoulder to shoulder with curious neighbors, who, captivated by the spirit of camaraderie, had gradually joined in to lend a helping hand. The barriers that had for so long separated the community, the invisible walls of prejudice and indifference, were crumbling as rapidly as the dilapidated walls being torn down in Kesha's humble abode. By sunset, the transformation was nothing short of miraculous. The small, cramped house that had once barely accommodated a kitchen table and a couple of rickety folding chairs now boasted a spacious, inviting restaurant space, a haven of warmth and connection. The Hells Angels, those burly, leather-clad figures, worked with the efficiency and precision of a professional construction crew, expanding the dining area, installing gleaming, commercial-grade kitchen equipment, and even adding a cheerful, hand-painted sign above the front door that proudly proclaimed, "Mama Kesha's Kitchen, where love is the secret ingredient." Kesha, her voice filled with disbelief and wonder, stood transfixed in the doorway of what was now a proper restaurant kitchen, its professional stoves gleaming under the warm glow of new lighting. Expanded counter space provided ample room for serious culinary creations, and a walk-in cooler hummed softly in the corner, promising a bounty of fresh ingredients. "I can't believe this is my house," she whispered, her eyes tracing the contours of the transformed space. "Believe it," Sarah, a vibrant member from the Chicago chapter, said, wiping paint from her hands with a satisfied smile. "And believe this too. We have already set up your social media account, and your incredible story is spreading like wildfire across the internet. You are going to have more customers than you know what to do with." Martha, who had remained inseparable from Danny since their miraculous reunion, approached Kesha, her eyes still glistening with the lingering effects of joyful tears. "Honey," she said softly, taking Kesha's hands in her own weathered ones, "I need you to know something. When I helped you the other day, I thought I was simply doing what any decent person would do, what any human being should do. I had no idea that I was helping the woman who had saved my son's life, the angel who had protected him from harm." "And I," Kesha replied, her voice choked with emotion, "had no idea that the woman who saved me, who gave me hope when I had none, was Danny's mother. It is as if the universe was trying to tell us something. weaving a tapestry of fate, drawing us together in ways we could never have imagined. Martha, her grip tightening on Kesha's hands, affirmed with a gentle firmness. It was telling us that we are family. All of us. Let me introduce you properly to Marcus, Danny, and every one of these amazing angels on motorcycles who have become a part of our lives. Mr. Mike, his leather jacket now dusted with construction debris, but his face radiant with a deep sense of fulfillment, appeared beside them. Kesha, he said, his voice serious but kind. We need to settle some business. He reached into his jacket and pulled out another envelope, its contents holding the key to Kesha's dreams. This contains the deed to your house. It is paid off completely. No more rent, no more landlord. This place belongs to you and Marcus now. A sanctuary, a haven, a place to build your future. Kesha stared at the legal documents in disbelief, her mind struggling to comprehend the magnitude of their generosity. Mr. Mike, she stammered, I can't accept this. It is too much. I don't deserve such kindness. Mr. Mike, his voice laced with the same unwavering conviction he had displayed earlier, replied firmly, You can, and you will. A restaurant needs stability, a foundation on which to grow. You can't build a business, fulfill your dreams, if you are constantly worried about where you're going to live. This is our gift to you, a token of our appreciation for everything you have done for us. Danny stepped forward, his arm protectively around Martha's shoulders, his eyes filled with warmth and gratitude. Besides, he added with a playful grin, we are going to be regular customers. Martha has already promised to help you perfect some of the old family recipes, the secrets passed down through generations, the flavors that will transport people back to their childhoods. Martha added with a loving smile at her son, and I have got some stories to tell about this young man's childhood, tales that might help you understand why he is so stubborn about taking care of people, why his heart overflows with compassion. The news crews, sensing the unfolding drama, had captured every precious moment of the day's events, and word of the miraculous reunion was already spreading far beyond the confines of Detroit, carried on the wings of the internet to every corner of the globe. The heartwarming story of the single mother who had opened her door to 25 strangers in a storm, inadvertently reuniting a family torn apart by decades of separation, was resonating with people from all walks of life, striking a chord deep within the human spirit. Orders for Kesha's food were already pouring in from people who had heard the incredible story and wanted to support her restaurant, to be a part of the miracle that was unfolding on Maple Street. As evening approached, the neighbors who had spent the day watching from a respectful distance, their curiosity piqued by the unfolding drama, began to approach more directly, drawn in by an irresistible force. Mrs. Johnson, known for her quiet demeanor and gentle nature, was the first to cross the street, carrying a covered dish in her hands. I brought some cornbread, she said shyly, her eyes avoiding direct contact. I thought maybe we could all have dinner together, try out the new restaurant, celebrate this joyous occasion. That sounds wonderful, Kesha replied, accepting the dish with genuine warmth and a heartfelt smile. Mr. Davis, accompanied by his wife, shuffled over, both of them looking slightly overwhelmed by everything they had witnessed, their faces etched with a mixture of disbelief and regret. We wanted to apologize, Mrs. Davis said quietly, her voice barely audible above the gentle hum of the gathering crowd. We have lived next to you for 2 years and never once made an effort to get to know you, to understand your story, to offer a helping hand. That was wrong of us, Mr. Davis added, his voice filled with remorse. We were blinded by our own prejudices, our own fears. We failed to see the beautiful soul that was right next door. We have all made mistakes, Kesha replied gently, her voice filled with forgiveness and understanding. What matters is what we do going forward, how we learn from our past mistakes, how we strive to be better neighbors, better human beings. Even some of the younger families from down the street had gathered their children, their eyes wide with fascination as they gazed at the motorcycles and the bikers, who patiently answered their endless stream of questions about the gleaming machines, their engines rumbling with raw power. But it was Mrs. Henderson's approach that surprised everyone the most, sending ripples of shock through the gathered crowd. The older woman, her face a mask of internal struggle, walked slowly across the street, each step seeming to weigh heavily on her shoulders. When she reached the group gathered around Kesha's front porch, she stopped, took a deep breath, and spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. "I owe you an apology," she said, her eyes meeting Kesha's with a newfound humility. "A big one. What I did the other day, how I treated you and your son, it was inexcusable. There is no excuse for my behavior." The crowd fell silent. Every eye focused on the woman who had been so cruel, so judgmental, just days before. The air crackled with anticipation, with a mixture of hope and trepidation. "I was wrong about you," Mrs. Henderson continued, her voice gradually growing stronger, gaining strength from her newfound honesty. "I was wrong about a lot of things. Watching what happened here today, seeing how these people treat you like family, understanding what kind of person you really are, it has opened my eyes. I am ashamed of myself. I am deeply sorry." Kesha, her heart overflowing with compassion, looked at the woman who had shoved her down in the street, who had hurled cruel names at her child, who had refused the simplest request for help. Yet, surprisingly, the anger she had expected to feel never surfaced. Instead, she felt something closer to understanding, a recognition of the struggles and insecurities that had driven Mrs. Henderson's behavior. "We all have bad days, Mrs. Henderson," Kesha said quietly, her voice filled with empathy. "We all stumble, we all make mistakes. What matters is how we choose to move forward, how we pick ourselves up, dust ourselves off, and strive to be better." Mrs. Henderson, her voice thick with emotion, replied, "I would like to be a better neighbor. If you would let me, I would like to be a part of this community." Kesha, her face breaking into a genuine smile, her eyes sparkling with warmth, replied, "Everyone is welcome at Mama Kesha's kitchen. Everyone. Our doors are always open." As the sun began its descent over Maple Street, painting the sky in hues of orange and gold, an impromptu block party began to take shape, a celebration of unity, of forgiveness, of the indomitable spirit of human connection. The Hells Angels, true to their nature, had brought out portable grills and were cooking up a feast of burgers and hot dogs alongside the neighbors, who had contributed dishes from their own kitchens, sharing their culinary creations with a generosity that had been absent for far too long. Children, their faces smeared with barbecue sauce and ice cream, ran joyfully between the motorcycles, their laughter mingling with the deeper voices of the bikers, who had appointed themselves honorary uncles and aunts, showering the children with affection and playful banter. Marcus, basking in the glow of attention and love, had claimed his position as the unofficial mascot of the celebration, moving from person to person with the unbridled confidence of a child who had never known strangers, only friends he hadn't met yet. Mr. Tommy, in a gesture of pure affection, had fashioned him a miniature leather vest that proudly proclaimed Little Angel on the back. And Marcus, his eyes shining with pride, wore it with an air of importance that was both endearing and hilarious. "Look, Mama," Marcus called out, running to show off his new vest. "I'm a big boy now." Kesha, her heart overflowing with love, replied, scooping him up for a hug. "You sure are, baby. You are the biggest, bravest boy I know." Martha, with her natural ability to organize and connect, had taken charge of coordinating the community dinner, moving through the crowd with the efficiency of someone who had spent a lifetime bringing people together, creating a sense of belonging wherever she went. She coordinated the dishes, ensuring that everyone had enough to eat, and somehow managed to remember everyone's name within hours of meeting them, making each person feel seen, valued, and appreciated. "This is what a neighborhood is supposed to feel like," she told Kesha as they watched the diverse group sharing food, stories, and laughter. "This is what community really means, a tapestry woven from different threads, bound together by kindness and mutual respect." Mr. Mike, sensing that the evening was drawing to a close, found Kesha as the work crews, their tasks completed, began to pack up their tools. The transformation of her house was complete, a testament to the power of collective effort. Tomorrow would mark the official opening of Mama Kesha's kitchen, a new chapter in her life, a testament to the resilience of the human spirit. "I have one more thing for you," he said, pulling out a small, well-worn leather journal. "This contains contact information for every chapter that contributed to today. If you ever need anything at all, you call us. You are part of our family now, permanently. We will always be there for you." Kesha, overwhelmed by the depth of their generosity, struggled to find the words to express her gratitude. Mr. Mike, I don't know how to thank you, any of you. This is beyond anything I ever imagined. You have given me a future, a community, a family. Mr. Mike, his voice filled with sincerity and warmth, replied, You don't need to thank us. You just need to keep being who you are. Keep opening your door to people who need help. Keep showing the world what real kindness looks like. As the Hells Angels, their hearts full of satisfaction, began to mount their motorcycles for the journey back to their respective homes, the neighbors who had spent the day working alongside them gathered to say goodbye, their faces filled with a mixture of gratitude and newfound respect. Handshakes turned into hugs, email addresses were exchanged, and promises to stay in touch were made with genuine sincerity, a testament to the bonds that had been forged on that extraordinary day. This isn't goodbye, Mr. Tommy said to Marcus as he lifted the little boy up for one last hug. Uncle Tommy is going to come visit all the time. And when you get big enough, maybe I will teach you how to ride a motorcycle. Marcus's eyes lit up with excitement. Really? You will? That would be so cool. Mr. Tommy chuckled. Really? But first, you have to help your mama make this the best restaurant in Detroit. That is your most important job. Marcus, his face serious with determination, replied, I will, I promise. I will be the best helper ever. The 1,500 motorcycles that had filled Maple Street with their presence began to depart in small groups, their engines creating a symphony of sound that seemed to carry with it a promise, a declaration that this was not an ending, but a beginning, the dawn of a new era on Maple Street. As the last of the bikes disappeared into the night, the street fell quiet, save for the sounds of neighbors cleaning up together, their voices hushed with contentment, and the echoes of children's laughter carried on the warm summer air. Kesha, her heart overflowing with gratitude, stood in the doorway of her transformed home, holding Marcus securely on her hip, with Martha and Danny standing protectively beside her, and a street full of neighbors, no longer strangers, standing with them, united in a shared sense of community. The loneliness that had weighed so heavily on her heart for so long had vanished, replaced by something she had almost forgotten existed, a profound sense of belonging, a deep connection to something larger than herself. Mama, Marcus said sleepily, his head resting on her shoulder, his voice filled with a childlike innocence. Are we happy now? Kesha, her eyes sweeping over the faces of her new family, at the restaurant that would let her build a future for her son, at the community that had embraced them both with open arms, whispered, her voice full of wonder and gratitude. Yes, baby. We are happy now. We are finally home. Tomorrow would bring the grand opening of Mama Kesha's kitchen, and with it, the beginning of a new chapter, not just for Kesha and Marcus, but for an entire community that had learned what miracles were possible when people chose kindness over fear, understanding over judgment, and love over isolation. 6 months later, the transformation of Maple Street was complete, reaching far beyond the physical renovation of Kesha's house, blossoming into a profound change of heart, a renaissance of the human spirit. What had once been a divided neighborhood, where people barely acknowledged each other's existence, had blossomed into a genuine community, where children played together across property lines, their laughter filling the air, and neighbors gathered regularly for impromptu barbecues and block parties, celebrating their shared humanity. Mama Kesha's kitchen had become more than just a restaurant. It was the beating heart of the neighborhood, a warm and welcoming haven where people from all walks of life came together, drawn by the aroma of perfectly seasoned fried chicken, the comforting flavors of homemade sides that tasted like childhood memories, and the genuine sense of connection that permeated the air. The walls of the restaurant were adorned with photographs from that miraculous day when 1,500 Hells Angels had descended on their quiet street, transforming it into a construction site powered by love and loyalty, a living testament to the transformative power of human kindness. The restaurant's success had exceeded everyone's wildest expectations, surpassing even Kesha's most ambitious dreams. Food critics from Detroit's major newspapers had written glowing reviews, praising Kesha's cooking as soulful perfection, a taste of authentic family tradition that warmed the heart and nourished the soul. A major food network had even approached her about featuring the restaurant on a national show, offering her a platform to share her incredible story with the world. Orders poured in daily from people who had heard the heartwarming tale of resilience and compassion, eager to support the woman who had opened her door to strangers in a storm, a beacon of hope in a world often shrouded in darkness. But for Kesha, the most meaningful measure of success wasn't found in the glowing newspaper reviews or the tantalizing prospect of television fame. It was found in the quiet moments, the simple joys, the everyday connections that had become the fabric of her life. It was found in moments like this morning, when she stood in her kitchen at 5 a.m., preparing for another busy day, the aroma of spices and simmering sauces filling the air, and realized that the crushing loneliness that had defined her life for so long was just a distant memory, a ghost of a past she had left behind. "Good morning, Mama Kesha," Danny called out as he entered through the back door, carrying fresh supplies from the market, his arms laden with baskets of ripe tomatoes, fragrant herbs, and freshly baked bread. At 26, he had embraced the role of assistant manager, handling much of the business side of the restaurant, freeing Kesha to focus on her true passion, cooking. More importantly, he had become like a son to her, filling a void she had never realized existed, and she had become a second mother to him, offering him the love and support he had always craved. "Morning, honey," she replied, accepting the kiss on the cheek he gave her every day, a simple gesture of affection that spoke volumes. "Martha is already here, working on those new biscuit recipes." In the dining room, Martha, her face creased with concentration, was indeed experimenting with variations on her grandmother's biscuit recipe, trying to perfect a version that would complement Kesha's perfectly seasoned fried chicken, creating a symphony of flavors that would transport her customers back to their childhoods. At 73, she had found a new purpose in life, splitting her time between helping at the restaurant, her hands expertly kneading dough and stirring sauces, and organizing community events that brought the neighborhood together, fostering a sense of unity and belonging. "Those smell incredible," Kesha said, sampling one of the warm biscuits, her eyes closing in appreciation. "I think we have got a winner. The texture is perfect, the flavor is divine. Your grandmother would be so proud." Martha, her face radiant with satisfaction, replied, "Good, because we are going to need them for the lunch rush. Mrs. Henderson called yesterday to reserve a table for 12. She is bringing her church group for their monthly meeting." The change in Mrs. Henderson had been perhaps the most dramatic transformation of all, a testament to the power of forgiveness and the transformative potential of human connection. The woman who had once shoved Kesha to the ground and spewed hateful words, her heart hardened by prejudice and fear, had become one of the restaurant's most loyal customers and biggest advocates, a champion of Kesha's story and a tireless promoter of her food. She had personally brought dozens of new customers to Mama Kesha's kitchen, using her influence in the community to spread the word about the amazing food and the even more amazing story behind it, showcasing the power of kindness and the importance of community. "She is trying to make amends," Martha had explained to Kesha early on, her voice filled with understanding. "Some people need more time to find their way to kindness, to shed their prejudices and embrace the beauty of human connection. But once they do, they hold on to it fiercely, cherishing the opportunity to make a difference." By noon, the restaurant was packed with its usual eclectic mix of customers, a vibrant tapestry of humanity woven together by a shared love of good food and a desire for connection. Hell's Angels, their leather jackets softened by years of experience, sat at tables next to suburban families, their children giggling with delight at the colorful characters. Elderly church groups, their faces etched with wisdom and kindness, shared space with young professionals, their laptops open and their voices buzzing with the energy of innovation. Children from the neighborhood treated the place like a second home, their laughter echoing through the air, their presence a constant reminder of the importance of community. The diversity that had once seemed impossible on Maple Street, the invisible barriers that had separated people for so long, were now as natural as breathing, a testament to the transformative power of love and acceptance. Marcus, now 2.5 years old, his cherubic face framed by a halo of golden curls, moved through the restaurant like a tiny host, charming customers with his bright smile, his infectious energy, and his endless chatter. He had grown up surrounded by love from every direction, nurtured by his mother, his grandmother Martha, his big brother Danny, and the extended family of Hell's Angels who visited regularly, showering him with affection and attention. The shy, often sick little boy had blossomed into a confident, joyful child, his heart overflowing with gratitude, who believed the whole world was his family, a source of endless wonder and delight. "Uncle Mike," Marcus squealed, his eyes lighting up with recognition as the familiar figure appeared in the doorway, his presence a beacon of warmth and security. Mr. Mike had kept his promise to stay connected, visiting at least twice a month and bringing different members of his extended brotherhood each time, introducing them to the woman who had changed everything for their brothers, the woman who had shown them the power of kindness and the importance of community. Today he was accompanied by Mr. Tommy and several newer faces, young men who had heard the story of Mama Kish's kitchen and wanted to meet the woman who had inspired them to embrace a life of service and compassion. "There's my little man," Mr. Mike said, scooping Marcus up for a hug, his voice filled with genuine affection. "Have you been helping your mama in the kitchen, keeping her on her toes?" Marcus, his face beaming with pride, announced, "I can crack eggs now. Mama says I'm a natural chef." Mr. Mike replied, catching Kesha's eye across the dining room and giving her the warm smile that had become as familiar as family. Just like his mama. A natural talent, a gift from God. The afternoon brought its usual steady stream of customers, but also something special, something that filled Kesha's heart with particular joy. A bus pulled up outside, its windows fogged with the breath of excited children, and 40 students from a Detroit elementary school filed out, their eyes wide with anticipation. They were part of a field trip that had become a monthly tradition, a journey to Mama Kish's kitchen that offered them not just a delicious meal, but a message of hope, a reminder that kindness and community could overcome any obstacle. "Miss Kesha," called out one of the regular visitors, a 7-year-old named Aisha, whose enthusiasm for the fried chicken was matched only by her love of the stories that came with every meal. "Tell us again about the night when all the motorcycle angels came to help you." Kesha smiled, her heart swelling with gratitude, as she settled into the routine that had become as much a part of the restaurant's appeal as the food itself, a testament to the power of storytelling and the importance of sharing our experiences with others. She told the story of that snowy night, of the 25 strangers who had needed shelter, of the fever that had nearly claimed Danny's life, and of the miraculous chain of events that had brought a community together, transforming a divided neighborhood into a sanctuary of love and support. "The most important part," she always concluded, her voice filled with conviction, "is that kindness is like a seed. You plant it by helping someone, by extending a hand to someone in need, and it grows into something bigger than you ever imagined, blossoming into a garden of hope and compassion." Those Hell's Angels, those unexpected angels of mercy, planted seeds of kindness everywhere they went, and look what grew from it, a thriving community, a testament to the transformative power of human connection. As evening approached and the restaurant began to wind down, the dinner rush subsiding into a peaceful lull, Kesha found herself in her usual spot by the kitchen window, her gaze drawn to the street where her miracle had begun, the place where her life had been forever changed. The house that had once stood isolated at the end of Maple Street was now the center of a thriving community, a hub of activity and connection. Children played in yards, their voices mingling with the laughter of parents who called greetings to each other across fence lines, sharing stories and building relationships. The division and suspicion that had once characterized the neighborhood, the invisible walls that had separated people for so long, had been replaced by a spirit of connection and mutual support, a shared understanding that they were all in this together. Martha joined her at the window, her face reflecting a peaceful contentment, following her gaze to the street where everything had changed, where the power of human kindness had transformed lives and created a community. "You know what I think about sometimes," Martha said quietly, her voice filled with a gentle wisdom. "All the people who are out there right now, feeling lost and alone, like you were, feeling scared and abandoned, like Danny was, feeling angry and isolated, like Mrs. Henderson was." Kesha, her heart filled with compassion, asked, "What about them? What do you think about them?" Martha, her eyes gazing out at the street, her voice filled with hope, replied. I think about how all of them are just one act of kindness away from having their whole world changed. One person willing to open their door, one stranger willing to lend a helping hand, one moment of choosing love over fear. That is all it takes to set in motion a chain of events that can transform lives and create a community. Danny appeared beside them. Having finished cleaning the kitchen for the day, his presence a comforting reminder of the bonds they had forged. The best part is that it doesn't have to be a big gesture, he added, his voice filled with conviction. It can be as simple as sharing a meal, or offering medicine to a sick child, or just treating someone like they matter, acknowledging their humanity, recognizing their worth. Kesha, her mind racing, thought about all the ripples that had spread out from that one snowy night, the countless lives that had been touched by their story. The Hells Angels, who had rediscovered the power of community service, finding purpose and fulfillment in helping others. The neighbors, who had learned to look beyond appearances and assumptions, embracing the beauty of human diversity. The children who visited the restaurant and heard stories about kindness conquering fear, learning to embrace compassion and empathy. The countless people who had been touched by the story through news coverage and social media, inspired to perform their own acts of compassion, spreading the message of hope and healing to every corner of the globe. Sometimes, she said, a smile playing on her lips, I wonder if this is what my mother meant when she used to say that helping others was really helping yourself. I thought I was just giving those men shelter from a storm, but they ended up sheltering me from a lifetime of loneliness, offering me a love and support I never knew existed. Mr. Mike, having lingered after the other customers had left, his presence a silent guardian, overheard her words as he approached the window where the three of them stood, united by a bond of love and gratitude. Your mother was right, he said simply, his voice filled with sincerity. But she was also wrong about one thing. Kesha, her curiosity piqued, asked, What is that? Mr. Mike, his eyes meeting hers with a knowing gaze, replied, You didn't just help yourself. You helped all of us remember who we wanted to be, the kind of people we aspired to be. Every person whose life you touched that night, every neighbor who learned to see past their prejudices, every child who comes here and learns that differences don't have to divide us. You helped all of them find their way to something better, to embrace their own humanity. As the last of the daylight faded and the restaurant settled into quiet, its warm glow illuminating the night, Kesha walked through the dining room one final time, straightening chairs, turning off lights, and absorbing the quiet hum of contentment that permeated the space. But her real purpose was simpler, more profound, to absorb the gratitude that filled every corner of the space she had built through courage, kindness, and the unwavering support of an unlikely family. Marcus had fallen asleep in one of the booths, exhausted by another day of playing host to dozens of surrogate aunts and uncles, his heart filled with love and joy. Danny gently lifted him, carrying him towards the stairs that led to their living quarters above the restaurant, his footsteps light and careful. Sweet dreams, little angel, Danny whispered, using the nickname that had stuck since that first day when Mr. Tommy had made him the miniature leather vest, a symbol of belonging and acceptance. Before heading upstairs herself, Kesha stepped outside onto the front porch where it all began, the place where her life had been forever transformed. The street was quiet now, bathed in the warm light spilling from windows where families were settling in for the evening, their lives enriched by the bonds they had forged. In the distance, she could hear the faint rumble of motorcycles, the echoes of a brotherhood that had become her family, probably some of Mr. Mike's crew heading home after their visit. She thought about Jerome, her ex-husband, who had abandoned her, and Marcus when life got difficult, choosing to run instead of fight. She wondered if he ever saw the news coverage or social media posts about Mama Kish's kitchen, if he ever realized the miracle that had unfolded on Maple Street, the testament to the power of love and community. She hoped he did, not out of spite, but because she wanted him to see what was possible when people chose to stay and fight for each other, instead of running away when things got hard, when faced with adversity. Thank you, she whispered to the night air, addressing her words to her mother, to the universe, to the mysterious forces that had brought 25 strangers to her door at exactly the moment when she needed them the most. From somewhere in the darkness, the sound of motorcycles grew louder, then faded as they passed by on their way to whatever adventure awaited them next, their engines rumbling with a promise of freedom and brotherhood. But Kesha knew that wherever they went, they carried with them the same message that had transformed Maple Street, a testament to the transformative power of human kindness, a beacon of hope in a world often shrouded in darkness. That kindness was never wasted, that community was stronger than isolation, and that sometimes the people who looked most different from you were exactly the family you needed. She went inside, locked the door, and climbed the stairs to the home where she belonged, the place where she would build her future, surrounded by the love of her family, a testament to the transformative power of human connection. Have you ever felt the subtle pull of destiny, the gentle nudge that guides you towards a connection you never knew you needed? Marcus lived, bathed in the golden light of affection and encouragement, each day a fresh canvas upon which to paint strokes of generosity. The story of Mama Kisha's kitchen had blossomed into something far grander than just recipes and recognition. It was a living testament to the transformative power of empathy, a beacon reminding all who crossed its threshold that even the most insignificant acts of compassion could create waves of profound change. It began with a solitary figure braving a tempest, yet it evolved into a symphony of interconnected lives. A gentle whisper affirming that kindness is always the truest path, that vulnerability and an open heart can transform strangers into family, into souls bound by shared experiences and unspoken understanding. Perhaps they were never strangers at all, merely kindred spirits waiting to be reunited. They were family, a part of your heart you hadn't recognized yet. Allow yourself to be embraced by these healing narratives, stories that nourish the soul and remind us of the beauty within ourselves and others.